The Honorable, the Deputy Speaker.
As we resume after lunch, I will recognize the member for Couva South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And as I rise to join this debate here this evening, I want to take the opportunity to commend my colleague from Naparima for doing yeoman service in his presentation and actually indicating to the national community that we have had a history of reports and inaction in this country, and what was really needed was the political will to ensure that there is value for money in terms of dealing with crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sorry, it was really an inspiring presentation on behalf of the member for Naparima. And it is important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to make a few points based on what has been said by the Minister for National Security and also the member for Laventille West when he led off on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. But more importantly, I would want to ask the Minister of National Security here this evening and for the national community to take note of whether he abused his authority as the Minister of National Security. I don't know whether he invited, he summoned, he called the hierarchy of the police service of this country to be present in the parliamentary chamber to hear him speak. Because certainly the hierarchy of the police service did not come to listen to the member of parliament for Naparima or the member of parliament for Couva South, but they came here certainly to listen to the Minister of National Security, and I think that this was an abuse on the part of the Minister of National Security in terms of...
Mr. Deputy, 48-6.
You take total responsibility for your comments, member? Okay, proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am asking the question whether it was an abuse on the part of...
1 second, member. Couva South, 1 second.
48-6, and if I may just be permitted to elucidate what it is I ask for your consideration on. It is not the fact of taking ownership, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's the fact that it is an improper motive. So one cannot own an improper motive because it's not a reference to fact. So the allegation that the minister has done something which is an abuse is in and of itself an offense under Standing Order 48-6. So I ask you humbly to consider it, sir.
Member, move on to your next point.
You see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when the government launched its National Crime Prevention Plan on the 18th of July 2018, and the minister at that point in time, in his capacity as the communication minister, indicated, and I quote, that crime is not about politics. And from the time you begin to politicize crime and the issues of crime and wish that the scourge of crime continues to develop in the hope that it mars a government and makes a government look bad, you are failing the country. I have simply asked the question here this evening, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we must never forget that the police service is an independent and autonomous organization under the constitutional framework of this country. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is important that we on this side reaffirm our commitment to and also take note of the continued hard work and dedication of the officers of the police service of Trinidad and Tobago and all of the law enforcement agencies in this country. And we gave the support when we were the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Prime Minister Kamla Persad Bissessa and those of us who were part of the cabinet and the government of Trinidad and Tobago ensured that there was the independence and rule of law observed as it relates to the independence and the work that the law enforcement agencies in the country was doing. And the Minister of National Security has absolutely no legitimacy in saying or attempting to attack members of this opposition in relation to what we did for the police service and the law enforcement agencies. In fact, he has been so obsessed with fake news in this country that he was the bearer of fake news in his entire presentation here this evening. And I want to take the opportunity to remind him because he misled the country and provided misinformation to this country when he said that
Member, please address the proper pronoun, please. He, member, honorable.
When the member said, the minister said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the opposition, I want to get it right, that when the government brought the orders to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago to simplify the process for the appointment of the Commissioner of Police, the opposition ran to the courts of Trinidad and Tobago in an attempt to delay the process and so on. But the truth is that the opposition went to the courts of Trinidad and Tobago fulfilling its role to ensure that there was a separation of powers being maintained under the Constitution of this country. And we will do it again because the PNM has an obsession with undermining the rule of law in this country. And you only have to check their track record since the days of independence up till 2018, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Clarify, Leader of the House.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the member is implying that the People's National Movement, and we represent that party, has had a history of undermining the law and order in this country. And that is certainly not wrong. That is an improper motive.
Member, could you rephrase your comments, please?
Madam, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have not referred to any member in a personal capacity here this evening. I
ask you to rephrase. So it's either you rephrase or you move on, retract and move on, kindly.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for your guidance. I simply was making the point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that in no way did the opposition in going to the courts of Trinidad and Tobago was being irresponsible under the Constitution of this country. We simply wanted to ensure that the separation of powers existed in this country, and we must never forget that the orders that they brought to the Parliament with respect to the appointment of the Commissioner of Police and the Deputy Commissioner of Police and so on had a heavy tinge of political involvement and political interference, where at that point in time, they wanted the minister to trigger the process as it relates to the appointment, and the courts ruled through Justice Rajkumar that the separation of powers must be maintained, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Minister of National Security went down the road of attempting again to continue this narrative that the opposition, whether when we were in government or were taking into consideration that we are now in opposition, we are not supportive to the different stakeholders of this country, the different arms of the law enforcement agencies and so on. And went on to indicate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, during his presentation that we on this side never did anything to support members of the law enforcement agencies and so on. But I want to take the opportunity again here this evening to remind the Minister of National Security and remind those on the government bench, and by extension Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that during the 2010 to 2015 period, the government of which I was part of was able to bring down serious crime to the lowest in 32 years by making law enforcement more present and giving them the resources to be more present. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, just to illustrate, the government to which I belong to ensured that more than 500 vehicles were purchased for the police service and 11,470 vehicles were refurbished, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government and the law enforcement agencies still continue to utilize the 13 surveillance bays which were established on the nation's highways, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we as a government at that point in time launched the community comfort patrols, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I want to ask those on the other side, today they come back and they attempt to tell the national community that they will pursue a program of community comfort patrols and so on. But why in the first place, Mr. Deputy Speaker, did they resort to disbanding this program in their first few months of office, Mr. Deputy Speaker?
Silence.
And in addition to these initiatives, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we ensured as a government that there was a special duty allowance of $1,000 for all law enforcement officers in this country. We also ensured it was a work in progress, but it did not become reality. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we realized that law enforcement is a very dangerous job and a very dangerous responsibility and so on. And we considered that in the line of duty, people or persons may fall in the line of performing their duties. And we had a responsibility to look after the well-being of the families of law enforcement officers. And today, whenever law enforcement officers fall in the line of duty, their recognition is always underscored, and also the well-being of their families are looked after from the point of view of the $1 million allocation, and that was conceptualized under the leadership of Kamla Prasad-Bissessar, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to remind the Minister of National Security and remind the government bench that the inter-agency joint patrols between Trinidad and Tobago and so on, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was implemented in our tenure. And in addition to that, we launched the Rapid Response Unit and the E99, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So, Minister of National Security, your narrative will probably satisfy yourself and satisfy your ego. But the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago will realize that you are indeed the bearer of fake news in relation to the propaganda that you continue to spread in your attempts to vilify members of the opposition. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are here today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, simply because every right-thinking citizen of our country is convinced that after 3 years of this government under Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, that this government has no idea, absolutely no idea, on how to properly govern Trinidad and Tobago. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, this debate is really in the direction of what I would call, if you examine what is emanating out of the government's bench and the presentations of the government, you will realize that they are trying to mask their incompetence through a public relations campaign in the Parliament here today, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And we must never forget, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this government told the country they had the solution to crime. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, when this government assumed office, they realized that they could not solve the crime problem, and they attempted to appoint someone else to tell them what to do. They had no idea what was needed, in spite of presenting a manifesto to the population of this country, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And sometimes it is important to remind the citizens of this country to understand how they were hoodwinked prior to the general elections of 2015. Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I want to quote from the message of the political leader, Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, from page 3 of their manifesto. As in our practice when in opposition, we have spent the last 5 years developing the necessary policies and programs to rebuild our country and our economy, restore confidence, equity, and social justice, and enhance and improve every area of national life, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, I want to tell them that this manifesto has failed the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, not only from the point of view of crime fighting, but Trinidad and Tobago is in a state of collapse, whether it is from education, health, and virtually every sector of government. And it is only time that you will all be voted out as the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I say so because they had no idea of what to do, and they needed Professor Ramesh Devsan and a team to attempt to tell them what to do as it relates to the police service. But more importantly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what the government is really doing is they are finding another scapegoat to blame, so that when the blame does not fall at their feet, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and in time, I want to signal to the hierarchy of the police service, because this is no different from the anti-gang legislation, when they told the country that this was the most important tool or weapon in the fight against crime, and they also said to, from the point of view of the SSA legislation, I want to tell them that the hierarchy of the police, in months to come, they will move away from the praise that they have attempted to heap on the police service, and in time to come, they may attempt to point their shortcomings or in the direction of blaming the police service, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the desperate cry of the people of this country, no matter where you live in our country today, rich or poor, employed or unemployed, whether you are Indo-Trinidadian, Afro-Trinidadian, white Chinese, or Lebanese, you people are concerned about being safe and secure. And after having spent over $155 billion in 3 years and approximately $24 billion on national security and a further $6 billion in the forthcoming year, citizens are feeling no better off in terms of their personal safety and their family's safety. And the business community also is feeling the scourge of crime throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of productivity, in terms of their final output, and even getting their workers to man the respective shifts of their businesses and so on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The bottom line is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government made so many promises prior to 2015, and in 2018, they have delivered absolutely nothing for the benefit of the country. And as I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they touted their 10-point plan. And we must never forget the pronouncement of the Prime Minister when he was the leader of the opposition. When he was in opposition, he said that if a government cannot keep the country safe, a government does not deserve to be in power. He said that a government that cannot deal with the crime problem is part of the problem. Like so many of his statements and that of his ministers, it is one song that is sung to get into power, and when you get into power, you sing from a different hymn book, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our children are being killed on their way to and from schools, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Our citizens are being killed in their homes, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and in their workplaces. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, whilst the Minister of National Security will want to tell you and want to tell us that this is not about the murders and this is not about what is occurring in Trinidad and Tobago, I want to tell the Minister of National Security that as a member of Parliament, I have to deal with the reality in the constituency of Couva South and the reality in Central Trinidad and the reality in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, whilst I will not attempt to read into the records the names of all of the constituents of Couva South who have been brutally murdered in the last 3 years under the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, I want to tell the Minister of National Security that indeed 23 constituents of Couva South have been brutally murdered as a result of their failings as a government. And today, whilst we debate this particular report, the families of these 23 constituents will certainly want to know how this report will be implemented to benefit and bring closure to their grief and what trauma and so on that they have passed through, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And in addition, the facts are, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I said, that in addition to our children, our mothers and daughters are being killed in their workplaces and in our street corners and in their homes and so on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And last week, I had to endure a very heart-wrenching experience when I was joined by my colleague, the member for Chaguanas East, and also the former Minister of Energy and so on, when we had to experience and to lay to rest one of the hardest working public servants and dedicated citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in the person of the former Commissioner of the Board of Inland Revenue and former board member of the National Gas Company, who was brutally murdered. And I have to speak about it because she resided in the constituency of Couva South, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and a woman who gave her life to the well-being and service of this country and to the Islamic community and towards Trinidad and Tobago. Certainly, her family will want to know how the implementation of this report from a time point of view will bring some kind of closure, and when will those who perpetrated this particular crime against her will be brought before the judicial system in the country. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Minister of National Security and the Minister in the Office of the Attorney General, and sometimes who acts as Attorney General from time to time during his 10-day stints and so on, spoke about the implementation of the reports. And in fact, the minister indicated during his presentation that the report is already being implemented. The recommendations of the report is well on the way to implementation. In fact, he waved a piece of paper for the benefit of the colleagues who are in the chamber without being specific to say, well, recommendation A, recommendation B, recommendation C will be implemented by the end of 2018, in the first half of 2019 and so on, that you will see A, B, and C becoming a reality in terms of its implementation. And both of them spoke in the direction or towards the issue of the reform of the Police Service Commission, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I do not know when that will happen in terms of the reform of the Police Service Commission, which the reports point to as being a key component as it relates to the transformation of the police service of this country. We must remember that anything in relation to the reform of the Police Service Commission and also amendments to the Police Service Act and the legislation and so on, that is needed to give direction and lift to this particular report will need the support of the opposition. It will need a constitutional majority, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and certainly it will need for the work of a joint select committee of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And certainly they have attempted to paint a picture here this evening, this morning, and I'm sure this afternoon, that this will happen probably in the next couple of months in relation to the reform of the police service of Trinidad and Tobago and the supporting pieces of legislation which will have to be amended in relation to giving the necessary support or lift, as we would say, in relation to the transformation of the police service. And I want to say that, again, is part of their propaganda. That is part of attempting to hoodwink the population by not leveling with the population and coming clean and really saying, well, we might be out of office, the incoming UNC government will have to deal with the issue of the reform of the Police Service Commission and the supporting pieces of legislation, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Your initial speaking time has elapsed. You have an additional 15. You care to avail yourself?
Yes, Mr. Deputy.
Proceed.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in addition to the persons who have been murdered, also, I also have to raise the very important issue of 6 persons have been missing or have disappeared from the constituency of Couva South since the last, since 2015, September of 2016, and I'm hoping that the operationalization of what they are speaking about in relation to the transformation of the police service will indeed provide the necessary energy that we heard of so much being touted by the Minister of National Security as it relates to bringing closure to the respective families such as Keston Mahabir and Anil Matagulam and Shannon Sukram and Danraj Adish Juman, all who have been missing, and their families continue to come to my constituency office pleading with me as it relates to bringing closure to their disappearance or bringing closure to knowing where or how, or bringing closure really to their disappearance, and also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of an employee of this said parliament was brutally murdered in the constituency, and today her case remains unsolved, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Honourable member, I've given you a certain amount of leeway, right, with regards to your discourse, and you know it continued to be along the line of the explanation with regards to these murders or missings. How long again will you plan to stay on this particular topic? Because again, we are dealing with a particular report, so you can, you know, move on kindly.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I take note of what you have, the advice you have extended to me, but I also take note of the fact that these issues are dealing with or directly related to the operations of the police service and the whole question of manpower, the manpower audit, and manning and staffing levels and the different units and arms of the police service. And I hope that the Minister of National Security and the government of Trinidad and Tobago will display the political will and provide the appropriate funding, Mr. Deputy Speaker, so as to bring closure and end the trauma and pain to the constituents of Couva South, the 23 families that have been murdered and the 6 who are yet to be accounted for, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you see it is important that we remind this government to tell us during probably the member for Laventil West will tell us what is the status of the Joint Border Protection Agency in the fight against crime. What is the status, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of the personal identification secure comparison and evaluation system that they promised the government more than 2 years ago? What is the status of the system for electronic monitoring that you have promised the country more than 3 years, Mr. Deputy Speaker? What improvements have you made to the witness protection program, Mr. Deputy Speaker? And what is the status of the offender management program that you promised the country in the last budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker? And also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government's big-ticket item to fight crime was the enactment and proclamation of the anti-gang legislation, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They said that 80% of the murders were committed were gang-related, and the passage of this legislation would give the police the ability to go after those involved in crime, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it is also important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that after 6 months of this legislation coming into effect, that over 200 murders have been committed since the proclamation of this legislation, and not a single person has been arrested, charged, or prosecuted for being a member involved in gang activity in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it is important to note that the opposition gave the required constitutional support for the passage of this legislation. So whilst they want to give this narrative that the opposition is unpatriotic, the opposition is not willing to give support to the legislative direction of the government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We on this side will hold the government to account based on the parliamentary process under the relevant standing orders and laws of this country. And we will ensure that when laws are brought to the parliament of this country, it is in the interest of the citizens of this country, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is important to ask the government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and again, the Minister of National Security, when he said that there is a drop in the murder rate. I don't know where the Minister of National Security is living, because we have now passed 450 murders, and we have had over 15 murders in about the last week, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, the big ticket item that was announced by the Minister of Finance with respect to national security was the establishment of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Operational Center. This, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is not something new. This is simply another name for what was established between 2010 and 2015 under the leadership of Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar. It is really the National Operations Center in action, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So they are attempting to take credit for something that they did not even have the manpower to conceptualize and operationalize, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Their success today in crime is really piggybacking on the foundation that was laid by the government of Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And what the citizens of this country, they want to see is the presence of law enforcement in their communities and in their villages and in their towns. The report of this committee, Mr. Deputy Speaker, points also in the direction of collaboration between law enforcement agencies. And I want to ask the government today and the Prime Minister, what is their position on joint police-army patrols? Because the Prime Minister, in this very said place, at a point in time when myself and other colleagues attempted to hold the government accountable as it relates to tackling the issue of murders and so on in central Trinidad, the Prime Minister indicated to me, based on a question that was filed, that there were joint police-army patrols taking place in the constituency of Couva South, and he called a number of streets, and he alluded to it being taking place in the constituency of Couva South and in Couva. Well, I want to tell the Prime Minister that he was very deceptive in providing that information to this Parliament, and he misled the Parliament, and he insulted the intelligence of the people of Couva by saying that joint police-army patrols were indeed taking place in Couva and in central Trinidad. And in fact, what is the government position as it relates to collaboration between the police and the army in terms of joint police-army patrols? Because when we were the government of the day and we brought legislation to give legitimacy to joint police-army patrols taking place in this country, the government of the time,
Silence.
the opposition gave no support to the Solia bill that it was popularly known as or referred to when it was brought to the parliament as part of the legislative process of the government of Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we would have also ensured the transformation of the the Witness Protection Program to ensure that it was properly resourced, and we would have gone in the direction of looking at the Justice Protection Act and also to bring into law provisions to operationalize the relationship between our country and our Caribbean and international partners to provide adequate and proper protection to persons and their families to assist in law enforcement in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, one of the worst forms of criminality in our country today, which faces our country today, is the women folk, our daughters and mothers, in terms of domestic violence. And we would have assisted in giving that protection to our daughters and our mothers in terms of protection for the victims of domestic violence, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by ensuring that there was to repeal and to replace with a stronger piece of legislation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I probably thought that the Minister of National Security would have attempted to provide some comfort in that regard, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, what is important to Trinidad and Tobago today is not another report. I think what is needed is in another government to deal with the issues of crime affecting the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Because you have failed the country in the last 3 years. And based on your manifesto, based on your lack of political will, and also your public relations campaign and your propaganda, you will not be able to achieve anything different in the next 2 years. Based on what I referred to earlier in my presentation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the reform of the police service and the appropriate legislative amendments will not happen overnight based on the parliamentary process and so on, and based also on the constitutional support that are needed to give that sense of legitimacy. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we as a society
you have 2 more minutes, member.
We will continue to live in fear. Our children will continue to be murdered, raped, and robbed and kidnapped. Business places and homes will continue to be hunting grounds for the criminals, and gangs will continue to prosper. So as long as the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and the PNM continues to remain in office. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have a team that will do this again for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This team will bring all the agencies of the state to fight crime and take back the country from the criminal element. We are prepared to work with law enforcement to go after the criminal element, seek out and bring justice to those who bring to justice those who break the law and terrorize our citizens. For those that are charged and brought before the court justice will be swift and absolute. The United National Congress will return our Trinidad and Tobago to the place we know it to be, where the hardworking persons will enjoy the resources that we are gifted with. No report will do this in relation to what is being touted by the PNM. What you need is a Prime Minister in the form of Kamla Persad-Bissessar and the United National Congress to take Trinidad and Tobago away from this state of chaos and anarchy that we have under the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. I thank you.
I recognize the member for St. Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for allowing me this opportunity to join the debate on this very, very important matter. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the matter before us is a debate on the 5th report of the Joint Select Committee on National Security, the 3rd session 2017-2018 of the 11th Parliament, on the final report of the Police Manpower Audit Committee. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this report is 111 pages long. And do you know my colleague who just spoke never mentioned one page, one line, one paragraph? Not one? Because one has to ask themselves, yes, it can be broadened into crime, and it ought to. But there's a time and a place for being patriotic, and there's a time and a place for being sensational. Today is the time and place for being patriotic and to debate the contents of the report.
Correct.
My colleague who preceded me came with the usual UNC smoke and mirrors, rhetoric, throwing red herrings, and launching an ad hominem attack against the Minister of National Security. Also, besmirching the reputation of officers who came here today.
Correct.
They did not come here today, as you suggested, but they came here today to hear an erudite debate, and they probably left in frustration after hearing the two contributions made by Naparima and Couva South. Why would they stay here to listen to what the UNC has to say? They wanted to hear what were their recommendations, what were their views on the recommendations in 111 pages of report. And they came on their own volition to lend physical support in the people's chamber. That is what they do. Madam, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to, you see, unless you have somebody responding now to the misinformation put out by Couva South again, it goes into the public domain and it takes root. The issue of the legislation to appoint a commissioner of police, the part that was taken out was where the minister triggers the process. That's all. That's all. The member for Couva South made a big deal about the comfort police. Let me tell you what the comfort police was about, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It had nothing to do with crime fighting. It had everything to do with giving out $60 million a year worth of contracts to rent vehicles. That is all the comfort police was about.
$20 million a month.
Right? Oh, it's more, $20 million a month to rent vehicles. It was just giving out contracts again. There was no interest in crime fighting. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Members, thank you. Members, please.
My colleague, and you should mention murders. I have no problem with that. But you see, unless you identify the problem, how do you know what solution to put into force? And that is what we wanted a debate on here today. Let us debate the report, identify the problems, and recommend solutions. But in typical UNC style, only rhetoric, only ad hominem attacks, and no recommendations. And I will speak directly, Couva South, to the 23 murders in your constituency and the pain and anguish the families are going through, because that ought to be addressed. But it ought to be addressed not in a sensationalistic fashion, but in a prescriptive manner moving forward. My colleague also wanted to know about electronic monitoring bracelets. The contract has been awarded. Done. But if they would pay attention and do their research, they would know that these things have been done and they will soon be implemented. But again, they just come here.
Members, please.
I promise to give them.
Please, please. Right, I need to hear the member for St. Joseph. Kindly proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know, the typical UNC solution, because he asked about funding. Where is the funding? Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you read this report, it has not everything to do with funding. You see, funding and throwing money at the problem is not the only solution. It is part of a wider solution. But in typical UNC style, throw money at it. Give $20 million a month to rent vehicles. Yeah. You have nothing to show for it. Just spend money, spend money, spend money.
Kickback.
We are not about that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, one must also question our colleagues opposite. The link between white-collar crime and street crime, blue-collar crime, cannot be underestimated. Because what funds street crime? What is the biggest funding component for street crime? Who brings in the guns? Not the little punks on the street, you know. When the little punks on the street are caught with a little bit of marijuana or cocaine, they didn't import it, you know. They didn't import it. When a vehicle is stolen and it goes to a chop shop, who is caught stealing the vehicle? The little punk. But where does that vehicle go? Who owns the chop shop? And that is what we don't talk about in this country, because it is an uncomfortable discussion to have. It is an uncomfortable discussion to have. And the link between white-collar crime and street crime, blue-collar crime, has to be seen in the context in our friends opposite not wanting to support anything to do with white-collar crime. But that has an impact on street crime. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the recent seizure of 10 high-powered rifles and a significant amount of drugs at 3 a.m. this morning is testimony to the new leadership under Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith. And that ought to be commended. That shows the can-do attitude about leadership. And this report, I will get to it soon, speaks squarely about leadership and governance. Leadership and governance. People ask about, what are you doing? The 80 emergency response unit vehicles that were recently distributed, Member of Parliament for Couva South, that is where you ask, when will the people in Couva South see a police presence to quote you, in their villages, communities, and towns? With this, you will see it. We are doing that. Let me address your concerns about the joint army police things. Joint army police patrols have gone on in the country in the past and are going on today as we speak.
Since the 70s.
Since the 1970s, 40 years now, they have been going on. What the PNM did not support was your attempt to bring legislation here, and the then Attorney General, Anand Ram Logan, with great fanfare, spoke about how this legislation was being used in both Jamaica and Grenada to sound effect. It took the Attorney General to expose the untruth about the Jamaican legislation experience. Correct, Attorney General? Yes. And it took independent Senator Helen Drayton to expose the untruth about that legislation and its use in Grenada. That is where that collapsed. Because we were being sold a basket of goods that was totally removed from the Jamaica experience, where the Attorney General exposed it as a hoax and the Grenada experience, where then independent Senator Helen Drayton quoted chapter and verse, and the UNC and this country was embarrassed about the hoax that was about to be perpetrated if the Attorney General and Helen Drayton were not on guard. So joint Army police patrols are going on and have been going on for over 40 years. So I think I have dealt comprehensively with the misinformation perpetrated by Couva South in their usual style. Because you see, in this era of untruths, once that gets into a person's mind, like the super gas not burning good, you know, it takes root. It takes root. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me get now to the actual report, because no one from that side to date, neither Naparima nor Couva South, mentioned the report. And I want to focus on a couple sections. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I draw your attention to page 17 of the report, because you see, if we don't fix the police service, the 23 families in Couva South will become 25. And no amount of standing here and blaming us is going to solve the problem. The problem will be solved by a proper debate on the merits of the police service, its demerits, its strengths, its weaknesses, what opportunities lie there for us, and what threats we could avert. And this is what this report is about. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on page 17 of this report, it speaks an overview of the police service. And I want the public, because I'm not speaking to the UNC again, I'm now speaking to the man in the street who is concerned about crime, as we all are and all should be. It talks about the police service being very hierarchical, very complex. It says there are 10 levels and 37 sections, divisions, departments. I ask, for a small country of 1.3 million people and with 7,884 sanctioned strength of the police service, the report is asking now, is that structure, is that hierarchical structure, which they call complex, suitable for our needs? Should it be slimmer to make it more nimble and more proactive? These are the things we should be debating. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when one goes to the report on page 53 of the report, and this is where I was hoping that the UNC, for once, would adopt a nationalistic, patriotic approach to the issue of crime, and not just quote statistics. There's a place for statistics. There's a place to say how many murders occur. We're not hiding from that. We're not running from that. But we are saying, let's address the problem. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you cannot run any organization, whether it's private sector, public sector, the police service, a RHA, a ministry, without proper governance and oversight. And this is the first part of the report that the Joint Select looked at. And let me just quote, the governance arrangements of the TTPS must ensure that while operational decisions rest with the police, they are held accountable for what through the process of a valid and transparent system. That is problem finding and solutions. But we all know we have problems with the police service. And what does the report say in its findings? They say here the major reasons for the up and down, seemingly zigzagged approach to the police oversight and governance in this country over the years seem to be, and this is crucial, because if you want to tackle crime, you need a police service that is properly governed. And they say here, the lack of understanding of the philosophy behind police oversight in a democracy. Now, this is not, what I am saying here is not going to make the headlines. What will make the headlines is what Couva South said, because that is sensationalism. But this is the crux of the matter.
Attacking the media?
No, I'm not attacking the media.
About Parliament, I have to raise the issue.
Right? Because that is what people want to hear, the sensationalism part. But this is what we have to attack, the governance issue. And what was some of the what were some of the concerns? And let's tell the public what the concerns of the Diosaran report were. Without effective oversight and an appropriate governance arrangement, accountability systems in any police enterprise will be non-existent, failing, or weak. Now that is a major concern. And how are we as a parliament, putting aside political differences, going to solve this issue? Certainly not through the contribution of Couva South. Certainly. That will not solve anything here. Mr. Deputy Speaker, other issues raised, and we all know no organization, and member for County Central will bear me out here, and Tabakit, both management people. No organization could perform optimally without proper leadership. Leadership. Because leadership sets the tone and sets the standard for the rest of the organization to follow. And yes, talking about leadership, where's Saparia by the way? Anyhow. And this is what the Diosaran report says, but they will not talk about this. But let the public who hear and listen to the PNM talk. Leadership from top to middle is consistently identified as one of the most important aspects to maintaining police integrity. We all talk about police integrity, but what are we doing about it? Where is the debate on this report about police leadership and restoring integrity so that police officers can know what the ethos of the police service is and go out there on a daily basis, putting their lives on the line to protect you and I? That is what they want to hear. That is what the Commissioner of Police came here today to hear. Right? And what were the findings? What were the findings? Key finding: there's an urgent need for the development of leadership expertise in the TTPS. Leadership expertise. Because how do you lead the constable taking a report? That leadership has to come from the top. And that's why we failed over the past few years in not appointing a substantive commissioner of police. And that is a stain on Trinidad and Tobago. Not a stain on the PNM, not a stain on the UNC, because this is a non-political, bipartisan affair. Crime ought not to be politicized. So one of the key concerns is that for a police enterprise to be successful, it requires effective leadership. And one of the recommendations in the report is a total change management program to change the culture of leadership within the TTPS. And that is what we ought to be addressing here today, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That is why we on this side are taking that approach, talking to the population about what the report says. You know what is the other concern that this report brought out? And for those of you on the public who don't have access to the report, it says this, and this ought to scare us. This ought to concern us. This ought to engage us in sensible debate. It goes on to say on page 57, the police service has lost its soul. Now that is a damning statement. It is not a damning statement against the men and women making up the police service, you know. They have to operate within that culture. But what happened over the decades? What happened over the decades, I ask, the country, where a report could put in black and white, laid in the parliament, in the people's chamber, a report that says the police service has lost its soul. its core purpose because people in the service have lost respect for the uncompromising standards of the service. This didn't start today. It didn't start under the PNM. It didn't start under the UNC. It's not a political blame game. But rather, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's the reality of this report. And we are here today to debate the findings of this report. An organization with no soul cannot be effective. And the 23 families in Couva South, I am sure, are concerned about this. I am sure. It goes on to say that middle management has lost its way. This is what the report is telling us. Middle management has lost its way. So it begs the question, what are we as 41 good souls in this parliament going to do? Are we going to continue blaming each other? Does that help? What are your recommendations on this Joint Select report? What are your recommendations on this Dio-Saran report? Mr. Deputy Speaker, the TTPS, like any large organization, with an important function of securing 1.3 million people, must have an efficient human resource management system. Must have it. It is imperative. No organization can function effectively without proper HR. So what were some of the findings? What did some of the people testify before this Joint Select Committee? You know what they said? The human resource system of the TTPS is in dire condition regarding record collection, storage, and retrieval. Record system is paper-based. So it's not about asking, as Couva South did, where do you know about funding? It's where is the funding required and to achieve what objective? This is one I would submit where funding is going to be needed. Right? Because it says here, it is crucial that persons with appropriate HR training, so you may have to bring in more and more civilians to do the HR component, or train police officers in HR management, HRM. This is what the population wants to hear from us today. This is what they are looking forward to hearing. A non-political or apolitical debate on a serious issue. But we have not heard that from my colleagues opposite. It talks about the high turnover at the level of the director. We have to solve all of those things. And that's why I said, when I started off, I challenged the member for Tabaquite and Carney Central as two management people, talk to us and let's address these issues. Don't just spell blame. That isn't going to help us today, right? Mr. Deputy Speaker, we all know that one of the areas for discontent among the police, the rank and file of the police, is the whole issue of promotions. How police officers are praised, how they are promoted. And if we had to motivate people, as people in management will know, you must have a sound promotion and appraisal system. And it must be based not only on seniority, but on your demonstrated competency, your track record. And the report speaks directly to this, but no one so far opposite. So I'm now challenging my colleagues opposite. Speak to the report. Speak to asking.
Challenge you. Speak about it.
The report talks about the TTPS becoming an unhealthy organization. You remember I said earlier, the report said the police service has no soul? Yes. It's an unhealthy organization. But yet we expect them to go out there every day and perform above and beyond the call of duty. And most of them do it. But how could they do it coming from an unhealthy system? A system which does not recognize competence. How can we do that? And it speaks to the current system for appraisal being totally flawed. Flawed. So let's put some recommendations into this thing. If the appraisal system is flawed, if officers, good officers, who want to be promoted can't get their promotion because the current system is flawed, you expect them to be motivated? But we have a chance here today, because I'm talking to most of the people outside there today who are reasonable. Most of the population is reasonable. The vast majority are reasonable. They will want to hear, if the promotion system is flawed, if the appraisal system is flawed, these 41 people that they have elected to serve them, what are we as a collective doing about it? The blame game is over, as Couva South did. That type of debate is over, done. It's not going to score you any points. We're not blaming you. I'm just saying that type of approach to the debate is not what is wanted today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, recruitment and training in the police service. Again, the report does not paint a complementary picture. So I spoke about governance, not complementary. I spoke about leadership, not complementary. I spoke about appraisal, not complementary. Now I'm speaking about recruitment and training. The report does not paint a good picture of the status quo of the police service. So if we want to bring down crime, we have to fix the service. And we will fix the service together if we work in that spirit of camaraderie. What is one of the key findings, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Please allow me to quote from page 65 of the report. A significant reason for the inefficiency, listen to the adjectives, inefficiency, ineffectiveness, and lack of professional integrity and commitment in the TTPS stems from deficiencies in recruitment, training, and assessment systems. But yet we blame the police. We blame the constable. We blame the sergeant. But they can only work with the system and culture that they have. It is up to us, reaching across the aisle 1.5 sword lengths away from each other, to join hands today and demonstrate to the public that we can do this together. That we could put aside political differences and fix the TTPS. Fix the inefficiencies, fix the ineffectiveness, and lack of professional integrity. One of the recommendations, and this is what we have to come to, what are some of the recommendations for the public to digest and for the public to comment on? One of the recommendations, because if you read the report on page 65, is that you might want to consider pre-service training. Throw it out to the public. That's what we ought to be doing here today. Throw out these recommendations to the public. Let's hear the public's views. Let's hear your views. But in doing that type of training, they go on to speak about, if you are going to have this pre-training program and train police officers, and again, I really like the fact that Tabakit and Carolina Central have to come after. They talk about the program should be accredited. The programs should be accredited so that your police officers are going to undergo a curriculum which has been tested and proven. This is what the public wants to hear us debate here today. This is what the public wants to hear us debate today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, We here whole night, you know. Whole night. Look, I'll bring my chadar here.
Chadar?
For when I get cold tonight.
I want to find the soul later.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Sorry. Chadar means cover or blanket in Hindi. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on page 68 of the report, because on page 68 of the report, we can all agree that a major issue in the police service is that of discipline. Discipline. And it speaks about the TTPS should be fostering a strong sense of discipline and professionalism within its ranks. If you do not have discipline...
Member, excuse, yeah. Your initial 30 minutes has expired. You have an additional 15. Care to avail?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Proceed.
Yes.
If you don't have discipline instilled in any organization, especially an organization charged with crime fighting or defense, the people in the Army, Coast Guard, police will tell you discipline is key. You must have discipline. But what does the report say about discipline? Let me tell, through you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the public who is listening to this debate. The system of treating with indiscipline is sluggish at best. This is what the report is saying. This is page 68 of the report, sir. Page 68 of the report says, the system of treating with indiscipline is sluggish at best, with numerous inefficiencies and protracted delays that render the entire process useless. Right? This is what the report is saying. So if you have a disciplinary process that is useless, what will happen? Members joining the police service will become infected because a culture of indiscipline will inadvertently have stepped in and spread like a cancer throughout the police service. So you have to check it. We have a ripe opportunity here today to talk to the public about the key issues facing the police service. Whether it's governance, leadership, recruitment, training, and now indiscipline or discipline. Right? So, one of the concerns raised again, they say the TTPS has veered so far away from its standards of discipline that the reality now exists that officers seem to be ignorant of the established policies. So Tabaki asked me, what are we going to do? This is what you have to do. If it is they are ignorant of the established processes for indiscipline, you have to put a training program in place within the TTPS for them to know when they breach and to have sanctions, to have due process and have sanctions, and they must feel the full brunt of the law immediately. That's what you have to do. That's what you have to do. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Members, please, I think I should mention at this time, electronic devices are either to be switched off or on silent. I think this is about the 4th time for the day that an electronic item has gone off. Okay? So I'm not going to tolerate it again. Switched off or on silent, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the last few minutes, I want to touch on 2 other items. On page 71, it deals with corruption. You must tackle corruption within the police service. You must. And finally, it talks about oversight, public confidence, and trust. And whenever the TTPS holds one of its community meetings, a common thread is the distrust or mistrust between the communities and the police. You always hear that. That's a fact. That's a fact. You can't varnish that. Public confidence and trust. And it speaks about what sort of oversight we need. And it the report starts to question the role of the police Service Commission, I believe, the PSC. Is it relevant? Is it functioning as it should? And this is what we have to tackle. Because if the public does not have confidence and trust in police officers, we are going nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. So the question everybody asked while I was speaking is what you're going to do. And I see if members opposite would read the report. As the Attorney General always says, if they will just read and do the work. On page 91 of the report, it talks to a roadmap for establishment of a police inspectorate within a period of 6 months. That is something that could be done if we analyze it and if we get bipartisan support. It talks about development of policy, police to be finalized for a police inspectorate. It goes to cabinet, gets cabinet approval for the policy. It then goes to the AG for legislative drafting if necessary. It is enacted into law, implementation, and establishment of the police inspectorate. That one initiative on page 91 of the report, if we read the report and if we debate the report, is a roadmap as to what we can do and what we can do together to bring down the levels of crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago as it now stands. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the last minute or two I have, I want to tell the country that this government under this Prime Minister is totally committed to solving the problems in the police service. We are totally committed to living up to our constitutional responsibilities in the protection of our citizenry. But the time, and we would not be debating this here today if the Prime Minister was not so concerned and so moved. But the debate has to take on another tone, another angle. We have had Naparima and Couva South. The usual, yeah, okay. Been there, done that, let's forget that. Forget the histrionics, but let's talk about the report now. I have just put the report squarely into the public domain by highlighting certain key aspects of it, identified problems, and spoken about possible solutions and initiatives that could be taken. We now join hands with our colleagues opposite, 1.5 swords length away. Let us do this in the interest of 1.3 million people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank you.
I recognize the member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I wish the member for St. Joseph would have made the statements of of reaching out and of working together and so on 3 years ago when we were pleading for that. And the word tone was used on several occasions. I myself used it many times. And the business of using the Parliament as a collaborative opportunity in order to get things done in the interest of the nation, we raised on several occasions. And in the last bill that we debated here, I don't think that friendliness was apparent. And I don't think that the member for St. Joseph and his colleagues opposite should keep raising the issue of being unpatriotic just because you take a different position or you articulate a strong view. And it's not sensationalist to talk about what's happening in this society and how it's impacting on people, which is what the member for Couva South did. So I would say that the tone that you want to establish now, I mean, you're asking for it. It is reasonable, but perhaps it's a little too late. And secondly, I think that given the nature of this crime issue, I mean, it is a big issue. People are dying every day. Some of them have died in my own constituency without solution of the crimes. And the report itself talks about the escalation that is taking place. And I want to go to the report now. I think on page 16.
Faster than you, huh? First part of the report, faster than you.
On page 16, maybe to make a point or two. Now, I want to say that the report makes a fairly realistic assessment of our situation. On page 15, item 217, it reads, unfortunately, our Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, TTPS, has retained an unfavorable reputation for being understaffed, underfunded, unstable, publicly undermined, archaic, and unprofessional. Crime in Trinidad and Tobago is steadily rising, and while from time to time there are downturns, looking back over the past decade, crime and the fear of crime have rocketed. Any reduction in crime or the fear of crime in the last 5 years has proven to be a short-term cycle within a long-term worsening trend instead of a reversal of the trend itself. And we have known that over the last 2 years especially, we've really been breaking records. We may end up with 550 murders at the end of the year this year. Lawbreakers, I continue on page 16, seem to be emboldened with the notion that there's a good chance of escaping punishment for criminal activity. The public seems to share the notion, and generally there seems to be a low public confidence in the central law enforcement agency and the criminal justice system on the whole. An unremittingly low crime detection rate and a less than desirable prosecution rate has reinforced this mistrust. So this is what we are dealing with in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is what the Police Manpower Audit Committee, which is the report that was referred to the Joint Select Committee and which is being reported on here after due deliberation by the JSC. This is what that report talked about. It talked about the troubled state of the police service, and it talked about the police service being in a wounded state. And it also talked about the human condition, human resources, and attitudes affecting the TTPS. And when you look at the short list of issues which the JSC puts before us on page 3, the issue of public confidence and trust is mentioned twice. Now, I'm sure it's a typo. But the fact that that was a typo, I think, tells us something about how important this particular issue is. This issue of public confidence and trust in the police service. I think that when you look at just a few pages of the report, you really find that the condition in which we find the police service today is quite alarming. And there are certain things that have been recommended for prompt attention in the report. Governance and oversight, the member for St. Joseph mentioned that. Human resource management, specifically screening, recruitment and selection, training and development, monitoring and evaluation, discipline, promotion, needs analysis, and succession planning and organization culture, and the customer-centered approach to service. Now, all the information in this report deriving from the original report and finding itself in terms of interpretation by the JSC and therefore in some of the recommendations of the JSC tell us that the police service is not effectively led, it is not well managed, it is a human resource nightmare. And what we really are faced with in the police service is a largely dysfunctional organization. Now, when the member for St. Joseph spoke, he spoke about the member for Tabakit and myself as knowing a little bit about management. And without going into that and how much you know and stuff like that, generally when you have a dysfunctional organization, you have to determine what is fixable, right? The second thing, you have to determine what cannot be fixed. And you close that, you suppress that, you deal with that. Then you have to decide whether transformation and rejuvenation is possible and how. And therefore, what can be strengthened to make this transformation and rejuvenation possible. And as you do that, you also have to reorient and reculturalize and incentivize and energize. And that is not an easy task in a dysfunctional organization that is really very hierarchical and tends to cultivate and evolve over time largely authoritarian systems. That is the nature of military systems. So when you talk, for instance, here about a police inspectorate, I wonder what the thing that might not be more effective should in fact be what you have in the US police systems, which is the internal audit function, where something is wrong in an organization and you have the capacity within the organization to move in and deal with the matter quickly. I don't know if what they sometimes call in the US an internal affairs division in the police service. So the question is whether that is not the thing that should be strengthened given the dysfunctionality. And if you ask the police inspectorate, which is being recommended here, which is meant to independently assess the service delivery, efficacy of the TTPS, promote good community police relations, encourage a human rights culture with the TTPS, promote accountability and transparency in the TTPS. I wonder if, given that the organization is dysfunctional and you do this, will it affect the state of play in the country? Is it going to address the issue of the escalation of murders and bring it down? Is it going to deal with the growth and intensity of power of the criminal gangs in the country and contain it and help to eradicate it? Will it deal with the assaults on the person in order to deal with attacks on property and the abuse of people in the system in order to commit robberies and other things like that? Will these things lead to the results that we require as citizens? Because that is what the member for St. Joseph avoided, and that is what the member for Port of Spain North St. Anne's avoided, because at the end of the day, all the internal things you do in the service, all the attempts that you make to fix it, to transform it, to energize it, to incentivize it, at the end of the day, what you are really trying to do is to do these things in order to achieve certain results. And those results have to be the results that will make the society feel less fearful, more safe, and more secure as it conducts its business. And I think this is the issue for us in addressing the report. Not that some elements of the report are not worthwhile, not that the work that the original committee did, the Manpower Audit Committee, led by Professor Dave Saran, is not important and does not highlight important considerations. But the question is, were we to implement some of these things, and the member for Port of Spain North St. Anne's West said that implementation had already begun. Were we to implement these things, would we begin to see a reduction in the places where it matters? Crimes against the community, crimes against the citizen, crimes between and among gangsters, and murders that have continued to proliferate, as the report itself says, year after year after year. Now, one of the important things that this report deals with is that it wants to ensure in the report that the most suitable candidates are chosen in the recruitment process. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for a report to write this, isn't that a condemnation of the current system of recruitment? And doesn't that in part explain what the problem of dysfunctionality is in the existing service? It then goes on to talk about the routes that are possible with 5 O-levels, with university graduates, and then with professional recruits. Now, I just want to say something about this, which is why I'm raising the issues in the way that I am. If you take well-recruited, effectively recruited 5 O-level graduates, all right, CXC graduates, and you train them properly as it's recommended here, and the dysfunctional system as exists now is not fixed, and you put these recruits in the system, and today, I think in one of the presentations here, it was mentioned that the younger policeman, I think it was a member for Laventille West, who had been in the police service for a short time, complained about the fact that the problems were really with the more senior and well-entrenched officers in the police system. So you take these young men, 5 O-levels, you well-train them and you put them in. What is going to happen to them over time in a dysfunctional system? And therefore, the issue here is not just to take recommendations, which might be good recommendations, and begin to fast-track them by putting a table which tells you, do this, do that, when to do it, how to do it, but to deal with the dysfunctionality of the system and address the issues so that when you make these kinds of recommendations and you effect them, it will make a difference. And when you go to the second route, the university graduate, they are also going to be put into the system at the level of constables, you know. So you're going to have two categories. They are going to be specially focused on special units, etc., but they are going in as constables. So you have two categories, 5 O-levels, you have university graduates going in as constables in that same dysfunctional system that I mentioned to you. Now, the professional recruits that I mentioned may have a chance to lead and to strengthen the specialist units which they are assigned. They may, in fact, be able to enter and be intermediaries of change, if you want to call that, because they may have, because they have special units, they may have smaller units within it, they may be able to do something. But I shudder to think of the other two groups going into the system, as dysfunctional as it is, and being to make a difference at the end of the day, both to the quality of the police service and secondly to the results that we expect from the police service. Now, the issue of promotion has also come up as an issue here. And it is a problem that is heavily complained about. The member for Laventille West made that point in his presentation. Now, there was, in fact, interviews for police promotion on August the 8th of this year. I'm bringing it and making it very contemporary. And I'm reading here, Mr. Chairman, from a publication that we do in my own constituency. I've done 6 of these now, 2 each year. And this deals with the issue of that particular problem of promotion. I quote from it. There are only 7 people in the police service who qualified to do the assistant commissioner's exam. There are 11 ranking officers who now function at senior superintendent level. Many of these are acting. There are 35 superintendent posts. 45 people will sit an exam for that, for the 35 posts, on August 8th. And then go for oral assessment. Some will make it, some will not. Some who are acting will be confirmed. Others will go down to inspector. Some superintendents will become senior in rank. The promoted and confirmed will be energetic. The demoted may well lose enthusiasm. All of these things have implications at the career level. An inspector at 55 must retire. Above inspector, you can retire at 60. When the assessments and promotions are over, 180 people will be in line for exit at the age of 55. And the issue of how promotions are done is also important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because, as you know, the system in the police changed so that police officers can move up on the basis of examinations and on the basis of acquired qualifications. But one of the things that is mentioned in this particular report is the fact that the police are supposed to make cases. They are supposed to charge people for crimes. And they are supposed to manage this matter in the courthouse. So if the amount of matters you have before the court and the amount of matters you win before the court and the amount of investigations that you are involved in are not critical to the process of promotion, why would you bother with these things if education and qualifications are more important and passing the exam is more important than the work of policing? So the issue of balancing the educational requirements which need to be improved in the police service and the training that is necessary to ensure that these educated people can effectively do the police work are important considerations in this matter. The report talks about the alarming state in which you cannot find out how many policemen and women are on duty, that you do not know how many people are on sick leave. Do you know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that if you are on sick leave, you can sit the exam to get a promotion? Do you know that if you are on leave, you can sit the exam to get a promotion? Do you know that if you are on some disciplinary charge, you can take the exam to get a promotion? So all of these dysfunctional elements of the police service have to be brought together and dealt with so that you can literally clean up the system in order to ensure that there is an adequate mixture of education and training in police work, bringing together better prepared and better educated people, but also people who are involved in police work, but who have the discipline and the disposition to do the work of policing, which is not an easy thing to do. There is a legend in this country in which there was a police commissioner, in which if you come for promotion with sick leave, and under our constitution, the police commissioner has the power to appoint and to dismiss. If you come for that promotion interview and you have spent a year and something on sick leave and you come to the interview, he would just ask you, legend has it, how you are today? You're well today? And if you say, yes, sir, I'm well today, you say, okay, go and make sure that you keep in good health. The interview is over. And if you came and you had, if you came and you had no cases before the court and you were involved in no investigations, that commissioner would simply ask you, how many cases you have before the court? And if you said a low number or zero, he said, how many investigations are you on? And you say again, a low number or zero. That commissioner will simply tell you, well, okay, go ahead then and see if you could do some police work to take some matters before the court for the next time you come in here. So that the regime was established in a certain way in which you had to be performing police work. You had to be a high-performance person. You had to be a person who attended to your duties in order to function in the police system. And one of the alarming statistics that comes out here, by the way, in addition to these things that I'm talking about, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that more people are leaving the police service than are being recruited annually by the police service. And that is here in this report. People, I'll get it for you. People are leaving the police force in larger numbers than, in fact, people are being recruited annually in the police force. 32, is it 32? Yeah, just for the record, I'll read it here. It's page 34 under manpower strength and utilization in the TTPS. The number of officers separating from the TTPS annually is greater than the number of intakes. The TTPS already has a shortfall of officers. The low recruitment of officers is further adding to the problem. The TTPS needs to acquire the necessary resources to recruit adequate officers. So it is an issue. And I want to say the member for Naparima made an important point this morning in talking about the statistics from Singapore and the other countries in which the ratio of the number of police to the population was smaller than Trinidad and Tobago, and it was more effective. They were more effective. So I am not big on recommendations here to expand the police force, you know. I am not big on that because you could go on a recruitment drive and recruit a lot of people and make no difference. The murder rates continue to go, the crime continue to increase. It doesn't make a difference. The question is, how do you deploy and manage these resources? What is the structure of the system? What is the objective of policing? It is not just to put the things that the mandate of the police force is to keep peace or whatever it is, and I know it's located in here, I can find it and read it, or to keep peace and order, or to deal with crime, or to provide safety and security. It is not that. The mandate has to be to deal with a situation that is going out of hand and bringing it under some measure of control. Now, having said that, I want to quote from one of the great economists that the Caribbean has produced, and that is Sir Arthur Lewis. He has one sentence in one of the pieces that he wrote, which says that everything begins with the market. And it's an important statement, although short and crisp, because what it says is that whenever you are doing anything, in order to be successful, you have to work backwards from the market if you are to achieve success. You have to start with what the market is saying and doing and telling you, and work backwards in order to be successful. And the member for St. Joseph talked about, he talked about problem solving, but I'd rather say problem identification and solution finding. If you have to be able to identify the problem, and you have to find what that solution is. And we have to ask our question, what is the problem that we are trying to solve? And what are the many critical dimensions of that problem, Mr. Deputy Speaker? And what is the solution? What are the solutions? What does the police service need to do? And I want to identify, I am sure this is not...
Your initial speaking time has expired.
Yes.
You have an additional 15. You care to avail yourself?
I would like to, Mr. Deputy.
Proceed.
I'm sure that there are many others. I'm not trying to be comprehensive here, but I just want to mention maybe 7 or 8 things too that I feel that are important for the police service to address. The first thing that the police service has to address is the gangs and the hotspot areas of Trinidad and Tobago, to bring the gangs under control and to bring the hotspot to a situation where they can be transformed from being hotspots to domains of reasonable living for the people in the community who live there. The second thing is that the police has to focus on safe zones in Trinidad and Tobago. If you have a system in which you have known hotspots, you have criminal gangs that are roving all over the country, you have drugs, you have guns in proliferation, you have unsecured borders, you have the infiltration of migrants, you have a situation in which you have human trafficking. You do not know what the complexity of this situation involves. While you deal with the gangs and you deal with the hotspots, you must have safe zones. Wherever there are large concentrations of people, or likely to be large concentrations of people, there must be special strategies to keep those things under control, keep such areas under control, under peaceful control. 3, there must be logistical deployment for effective control of the society itself. That is to say, outside of the safe zones, outside of the hotspots, outside of the gang areas, for the rest of the society, there must be logistical deployment for effective control. By that I mean police stations, mobile police stations that are managing with a strategy, mobile patrols that are effective. You need to have technology properly deployed in and out of cars, in and out of police, connecting stations with the mobility. You need to have rapid response capability. You need to have backup if there's a crisis. You need to focus on the returning criminals from abroad. And you need to deal with the issue of white-collar crime, and something that the member for St. Joseph mentioned, the links between white-collar crime and police corruption, which is mentioned in this particular report, and police linkages with gangs, guns, and drugs, and white-collar crime with what you might call blue-collar or gangster crime in the community. You have to have focus on these things. You must also focus on white-collar crime as an issue, and you have to focus on illegal migration and its implications. So it's not just problem identification in the context of what is wrong with the police, what is wrong with the police system, what is wrong with the police service. Yes, that is a problem, but it is problem identification for what do we need a police service for, and what problems do the police need to address to solve the problems of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. And there has to be a connectivity with that. And you can draw that on a sheet of paper, and you can develop a strategy if you think it through properly. And that would then tell you what kind of organization you need, what are the linkages you need between mobile stations, between mobile patrols, between stations, between technology, and so on. What are the areas of concentration, and what manner of deployment, in what quantities, with what kinds of skills that you need to deploy in the country. And my own assessment is that there is much more thinking to do here. You don't have to start from scratch. We have hundreds, we have, well, at least a dozen reports. So we don't have to start from scratch. A lot of things have been done already. But I want to say the problem identification has to do with the problems in the police service, yes, and they must be corrected. But the problems in the society, the problems of crime in the society need to be identified. And those problems need to, working backwards, taking Arthur Lewis's statement that everything begins with the market. You start with that market of crime. These crime projects that you need to design, and you work backwards from that. What do you need? What kind of organization do you need the police organization to be? And what kind of strategies do you need to deploy in collaboration with each other to get these things done? And I have not even begun to talk about Army and Navy and all of these kinds of things which need to be connected to it. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the report is important, and we need to address the thing. We need to address the elements of the report and the recommendation of the report. So, and the other question is, this is something that the government sometimes shies away from. Sometimes it takes it on, sometimes it shies away from it. But the question is, whose job is it to maintain law and order? You know, on page 12, the importance of policing, 2.7, the maintenance of law and order is an essential public service. Well, when you put it like that, I mean, it is nebulous who is in charge of it. Well, I want to say that the political directorate is the first element in charge of it, because they are elected. The political directorate is elected to govern, and the first law of governance is safety and security of the people and the state. The second element is the Commissioner of Police, and the Commissioner of Police, I want to say in Trinidad and Tobago, has a lot of power. He or she, whoever that person is, has constitutional power in Trinidad and Tobago of an immense kind. They can hire, fire, transfer, deploy at will. They have that power. They have disciplinary control from hiring to firing. The third thing is that are other people in charge of this? Are other people accountable for law and order? Yes. You cannot have law and order in this country without immigration, customs, the military playing a role as a military should, not an intrusive role in your society, but being, what can I say, being acknowledged as a source for public order in the society as required. And fourthly, the citizens. The citizens are very critical. One of the things that was done here is that this story, this report went back to policing in the city of Paris, and it went back to 1667. And then it went to policing in the United Kingdom, in the Metropolitan Police in London. And it talked about the basis on which policing in the British system was based on citizen consent. And it then went on to say that this had continued as a tradition in Canada, New Zealand, where's the other country? Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and there was a fourth one that was mentioned, I don't recall now, and I can't find the page right now. But I would add, it also existed in Hong Kong and it existed in Singapore. And the reason or the context of that is that citizens agree, just as citizens agree to elect people to represent their interest in a parliamentary system or in a governance system, they also agree to give military power for the local context, for the local jurisdiction of the state to the police. And I want to say this distrust between police and the public, or this distrust of the public for the police, is a serious problem in Trinidad and Tobago, because it means that the police do not govern by consent. It means that they do not function by consent. And if they do not function by consent, enjoying the security of tenure from the consent of the people that they do their job in a certain way, then what it opens the door for is political interference. And I want to say that these matters cannot be dismissed as simple little things that can be solved by small recommendations one by one. There is deep dysfunctionality in the police service, and there is deep dysfunctionality in the body politic of Trinidad and Tobago. The institutional capabilities within the state of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, these matters need to be addressed in a systematic way, and they must be acknowledged. And these are the problems that should be part of the parliamentary discussion here. Because from the realistic assessment that I read out, remember I started by saying I thought that there was a realistic assessment of the condition of the police service, and I read from page 16. It goes on to say on page 17, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is very hierarchical, complex in nature, with 10 levels of ranks and 37 sections, division, branches, etc., and it goes on. And there is a section here in which one of the stakeholders who is reported in here, I cannot find the page now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, says that really what we need to do is to scrap the entire bad egg situation in the police service, because you can't do anything without doing that. And that it's only from there, if you are able to do that, that you will be able to do something with the police service to get it functional. But it's more than that. Because as I said, you cannot deal with that situation in the police service without dealing with customs, without dealing with immigration, without having a role for the military as a support system, without using the Navy, the Coast Guard in a certain way. And there are other things, which is that given where the crime has happened now in Trinidad and Tobago, where it has evolved to, where you have corruptibility at different levels, where you have big money involved, where you have guns involved, where you have drugs involved, where you have an entire pervasive infection of the society in Trinidad and Tobago. Given all of these things, I think that the seriousness with which the issue of reform of the police system has to be taken must be acknowledged. It cannot be done in this dysfunctional system, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by small recommendations that deal with human resources and that deal with tinkering with the existing system in that way. And having said that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will close at this point. Having said that, I want to say that I welcome the opportunity to make a few points. I commend the committee that did the original report under Professor Deosaran for pulling together all the information and making the recommendations. I commend the JSC for the work that it has done to bring this into Parliament, all my colleagues who sat on the committee. But I want to say that I am not sure if putting into place these recommendations are going to lead to the result that we are seeking, which is the control and diminishing of murders and crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Finally, I want to say there's one recommendation in here which I do not support at all. And that recommendation is that one way of selecting the Commissioner of Police is by direct elections. And that recommendation, I want to say that I am totally against. You will turn the political system in this country upside down.
I recognize the Attorney General.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise to give contribution to this particular debate. As we are all aware, this particular debate focuses around a very solid and important issue in Trinidad and Tobago, which is the management factor consideration, future, and degree of hope that one can place into the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. It's true, as my learned colleagues say, that there have been many reports for many years on the TTPS. It's true that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is the arm that carries the weight of law enforcement. It is true that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has been through the doldrums insofar as the confidence that the public has in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has been eroded over time. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me start with the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, in particular Section 123A. In Section 123A of the Supreme Law of Trinidad and Tobago, the Commissioner of Police shall have the complete power to manage the police service and is required to ensure that the human, financial, and material resources available to the service are used in an efficient and effective manner. Those are not my words. Those are literally the words of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. As my learned colleague for St. Joseph put forward, therefore, and as the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West put forward, the first and most important aspect was to ensure that leadership of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service was in gear. Indeed, this report, which is an excellent report, this report centers around some very specific recommendations. And we've taken the opportunity, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to list out 83 of the specific recommendations. There are 83 specific recommendations that can be lifted out of this report and the Joint Select Committee's work which brought us here. I wish to publicly commend the Diosaran-led committee for the work that it did, because it formed, and I'm able to say now as a member of the government, it forms the blueprint for management of the issue of reform of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. One need look no further than this. I'm also very pleased to say that of the 83 items identified, the current Commissioner of Police has ensured that all 83 heads are traversed by a plan of implementation. But I'm also very pleased to say that the government has already operationalized quite a bit of the material that has been traversed. And the material that has been traversed has been operationalized in very important mechanisms. The report talks about professional skills at a high level, recommendation 71. It talks about asset management and fleet management, recommendation 18. It talks about the issue of overtime, recommendation 24, 25, 26. It talks about attendance at the court, recommendation 58. It talks about the interaction with the Police Complaints Authority, recommendation 68. It talks about the entry of specialist services from tertiary level qualified level entry into the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and that's at recommendations 5 and 6. It talks about the issue of road traffic offenses, that's at recommendation 7. It talks about the decriminalization of marijuana, that's at recommendation 9. It talks about interagency coordination at recommendation 14. It talks about community policing, municipal policing at recommendations 16 and 76. It talks about corruption at recommendation to be found at page 271. Those are the heads that I wish to put into context now, because I agree with my learned colleagues. It's all well and good to talk about a report, on a report, to reflect upon the fact that we've had years of reports into the cycle. The question is ultimately what is being done, what has been done, and what is yet to be done in dealing with the issue of positions that, yes, in dealing with the positions of reform. Now, permit me to, just before I delve into that point, agree with a position volunteered by my learned colleague from Caroni Central. The government shares the view, and I am now authorized in considering this report that has come from the Joint Select Committee. The government shares the view that the position should always be that the police commissioner should not be elected by public polling. We share that view, and we are on the same page with that. That the government's position is equal to that espoused by my learned colleague for Caroni Central. So I can clear that one up quickly. But in recapping now, the issue that Trinidad and Tobago really wants to hear: what have we done? What are we doing? And what can we expect? Let me dive straight into that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let's talk about the interaction between the role of the executive, the functionality of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and how we treat with crime. What is crime? Crime is something defined under the common law of our country, or defined under the statutory laws of our country, or the Constitution in some aspects, as something which is to be treated with by way of a due process movement from allegation to evidential consideration to the laying of a charge. When a charge is laid, it goes through the court processes, which at present could be the magistrate's court if it's a summary offense. It could be the magistrate's court leading to the High Court if it is a preliminary inquiry. It can be the Court of Appeal or the Privy Council. That's the due processing point. A verdict is eventually given, and somebody is either acquitted, charged, or convicted, or they are said to have actually been the subject of a conviction, but they're reprimanded and discharged. So you can have that sort of process. Who are the important players that work and that are featured in this bill? Number one, in that criminal justice system, obviously, we're talking about the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service receives witness evidence from people that report crimes. They conduct an investigation. They are arranged into several divisions. Those divisions go out, do interviews, etc. They can charge somebody of their own volition, or they can take that material to the Director of Public Prosecutions, who has powers under Section 90 of the Constitution as the supreme law to commence prosecution or discontinue prosecution or do as he wishes. When they get there, it's very important now for the charging officer to himself or herself be a witness in the court. You now get into a court process, and what is involved in a court process? You need to have a judge, a physical court, court staff. You need to have a prosecutor. You need to have witnesses. You need to have a defense attorney. You may or may not need to have a bailiff. You may or may not need to have a bailor. You may or may not need to have a justice of the peace. You need officers from the Director of Public Prosecutions Department. And very importantly, you need defense attorneys. Those are the articulating elements inside of here. And in operationalizing the recommendations made by this committee, specifically in treating with recommendation number 58 for attendance at court, I wish to now tell you what has been done and what is being done. You see, the UNC's approach to the management of crime under their tenure really can be summarized into a few things. Number one, legislation was brought to increase the level of offenses.
State of emergency.
Those offenses were more fines or more jail term. And I refer you to a number of pieces of law to amend the Firearms Act, etc., etc. Secondly, their big nuclear policy to treat with crime was the state of emergency. The state of emergency, so declared, so operationalized, which is no longer a conversation in Trinidad and Tobago, cost the taxpayers millions of dollars. Reputational damage was suffered by the country. The next item that the last government spent and implemented was the Soldier Police Bill. And the Soldier Police Bill was brought to be the solution in allowing Trinidad and Tobago to have better policing. And the member for Naparima said, well, the opposition, then now government, didn't support the Soldier Police Bill, and he wanted to know the status of joint patrols, etc. Let me answer that question as to the status and the rationale for the Soldier Police Bill very carefully. the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago has the Commander-in-Chief of Arms as the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. The collection of divisions that comprise the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force falls under currently Her Excellency Paula May Weeks. The police have in their positioning the ability to have divisions. The divisions are done under the Police Service Act and the Police Service Regulations. The Police Service Regulations, as saved under 2006, allow for the establishment of joint patrols. It was always the law by a combination of the Constitution, the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force Act, and the Police Service Act and Regulations that you can have joint patrols. So the need for soldier policing, for soldiers to have police powers, was never a feature of this country. That was required to be operationalized in the manner that my friends brought it. What was the game plan by the last government? Under the Ministry of National Security, which is a target for their attention, there were 6 ministers and junior ministers in the Ministry of National Security. Let me remind the population. You had Brigadier John Sandy, you had Jack Warner, you had Emmanuel George, you had Carlton Alfonso. Don't forget you had Colin Partak and Mbao Mohini. 6 people running the Ministry of National Security. And you had Gary Griffith, 7. 7 people running the Ministry of National Security. You see, I fail to recall Griffith because he was fired by the last government for telling the truth. So perhaps that may be the reason why I inadvertently included his name. Ministry of Justice, established solely to articulate with the Ministry of National Security and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Prison Service. The Ministry of Justice had Herbert Volney, Chrislyn Moore, Emmanuel George, Prakash Ramada. 4 ministers of justice. Their requirement was to build courts, develop legislation, improve the criminal justice arena. Absolutely nothing materialized from the Ministry of Justice in the entire time that it existed. Some people became millionaires as a result of work. What about legal affairs? Legal affairs was managed by my learned colleague, my friend Prakash Ramada, the member for St. Augustine. But legal affairs controls the land records of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll come to that in a particular moment to tell you how that employs good measure for the fight against crime. And then, of course, we had the Attorney General's office under Anand Ramlogan and Gavin Nicholas. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, let's get back to the report. In looking at this report, let me put it into context of what has been done. The criminal justice system must work for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to work. Because after all, they are taking reports of crime, they are taking evidential analysis, and they have to take it somewhere. They take it to a court. And for the entire time that my friends opposite were in opposition, were in government, not a scintilla of improvement in the criminal justice system happened. So when we came into office, we established a dedicated plan to improve the criminal justice system. The first thing we did, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was to look at the metrics. We went into the prison system. We looked at the case flow. We looked at the nature of matters. We looked at how long they were actually in arrears. What the time frame of moving someone, a remanded prisoner, for instance, who's in custody, into trial involved. And what did we discover? Cases that are 20 and 25 years in arrears. That's what we discovered. There are 4,002 prisoners in the prison system today, 1,000 of whom are there for the offense of murder and therefore are non-bailable. 1,000 odd who are there as convicted persons and who are serving time, and all the rest are on remand. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, in causing that analysis, we went further. We went into the magistracy, because the police, in terms of their court positioning, in terms of the recommendations coming forward by this committee, in talking about how the police manage their attendance at court at recommendation 58, we went into the courts. What did we discover? Let's start with the magistrates' court. In the magistrates' court, the case flow is anywhere between 145,000 cases per year to 165,000 cases per year. 102,000 of those cases are motor vehicle and road traffic offenses. 62% of the case volume in the magistrates' court is motor vehicle and road traffic offenses. You have 40 magistrates managing 145,000 cases. The disposition rate is at best 40%, meaning 60% of each year goes into backlog. And then we went further. We went into the High Court. In the High Court, and looking at preliminary inquiries, we have confirmed that there are 29,000 indictable matters in backlog in the High Court. Police are required to treat with 29,000 matters in backlog in the High Court. We went into the Magistrates' Court. There were no rules of court. There was no computerization of records. You manually sit down and manage the positions in a long ledger book. The clerk of the peace is an administrative officer that ascended in the ranks. It's chaos and pandemonium in those courts, and police officers are trapped in that environment where you don't know what time the court is going to sit, what time the court is going to rise. We went further. We looked at the case management structure. We looked at the fact that there was no effective case management going on in the courts. So, obviously, if you're talking about the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, as we're doing now, the question of improving their competence, the question of improving their efficacy is not only to be had as a conversation on boots on the ground, but very importantly, in ensuring that there are consequences which come about by way of due process in our courts because of boots on the ground. We went in and we looked at the Evidence Act to analyze whether witnesses would come forward. We went in to notice that witnesses were being murdered. And what did this government do? Because we're talking about operationalization. And we've not often had a chance to explain, by way of connecting the dots, what the government, the PNM government, this government has done for this country. And let me start connecting those dots. We firstly, in looking at that statistical input, as I've done, Magistrates' Court, criminal justice sector, in looking at the High Court, the Appeal Court, we made sure that while we did that, we looked at the prosecutorial arm in the DPP's office. We looked at the financial investigation arm in the Financial Intelligence Unit. We looked at the capacity in the Board of Inland Revenue. We looked at the whole of government structures. What did we do? Number one, first item of business, came to Parliament to appoint a Commissioner of Police. As my friends have traversed, but I'll put it in a slightly different way. We came, we amended the law. We realized that the mischief was nobody was pulling the trigger. The Director of Personnel Administration that has the responsibility to pull the administrative trigger to cause the appointment of a Commissioner of Police failed to pull that trigger in the period 2013, 2014, 2015. 3 years. There was no pulling of that administrative trigger. So we said in the amended law, let us have the minister say, start the process. Not intervene in the process, but simply say, please start the process. My learned friends went to court. Mrs. Prasad Bisesta, leader of the opposition, member for Siparia, went to court, spent a year in the court, delaying the process. The judge came back and said, well, okay, we'll just take the minister off and let the process start. We could have appealed it because we were absolutely sure we were right, but it made no sense to appeal. We'd waste more time. We'd play into the delay game. So we left that judgment as it was, and the process started. 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. 4 parliamentary years or sessions it took for us to appoint Commissioner Gary Griffith. What did we do next? We said, now that you have a TTPS head and morale can be dealt with, and the country is buoyed by the morale now being experienced by that active appointment, we went in and we said, listen, let's make sure that the courts are not bottlenecked. Let's create divisions of court. We started off by creating the Family and Children Division. which has the family court, and the children's court, which is a criminal court. We came in and we said, let us remove the motor vehicle and road traffic offenses, 102,000 per year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, choking the system, occupying judicial capacity, police capacity. We said, let us cause those to become violations. Remove 62% of the backlog in the court. What did we do next? We said, let's create a criminal division. We established a criminal division by Act of Parliament. What did we do next? We promulgated in 2016 immediately the criminal proceedings rules. What did we do next? We said to the country, let us have masters case manage the files that come towards them, and let's pilot it out in the children's court. What did we do next? We acquired software for the children's court. We took that software and we applied it to the magistrates' court, so we're computerizing the magistracy for the first time. What did we do next? We have said to the country it is inappropriate to have the clerk of the peace as a non-lawyer. It's in fact a breach of the Legal Profession Act. We moved into Parliament and we amended it such that there's a registrar of the magistrates' court. What did we do next? We created specialist courts in the criminal division. What did we do next? We came in a package of laws to treat with the Financial Crimes, Proceeds of Crime Act, Financial Intelligence Unit Act, Mutual Assistance in Legal Matters Act. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me start drilling even further now. This government is not contemplating doing, I'm telling you what we did, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Member for Naparima said, if they had their way, they would have come and amend something. He couldn't even specify. Violence against women is a priority, and they would amend the law. He didn't say which law, he didn't say what, he didn't say how. Let me tell you what we did. Because we used the amendments in the children's arena specifically to replicate it in the magistracy. And let me tell you what we did, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Not what we're doing, but what we did. For children and for women, and with no support from the UNC in large part, we did the following. Number one, we operationalized and we produced the judges' rules for children in 2016. Published Gazette 1 November 16. 2, we did the Family and Children Division Act, where we amended 19 laws to improve the fate of children and women by allowing women the dignity for the first time to get their maintenance orders in a high court and not have to have 2 sets of proceedings going on. 19 laws. We created the family division, the children's court. We operationalized 2 children's courts. The only thing I can hear from my friends opposite about the children's court is who you rent it from. Did you rent it from Frankie Khan's wife? The building.
The judiciary.
Where the fact was that the judiciary had selected it, and that's arm's length value for money that stands with transparent measure before we came into office. But that's their big contribution to the children's court. What do we do next? We did the Criminal Procedure Amendment Rules 2018 for children themselves. Legal Notice number 20 and 27 of February 2018. What do we do next? We did the Family Proceedings Amendment Rules 2018, published on the 27th of February 2018. We did the Children Court Rules 2018, published on the 27th of February 2018. What did we do next? We did the UN protocols and signed the measures for anonymity for charges for children. We went further. We signed the Children's Court Specialty Procedures. We did the Child Rehabilitation Center Designation Order, published 15th of May 2017. Child Rehabilitation Center Regs 2017, published May 2017. Child Rehabilitation Center Designation Order, published 15 September 2017. Child Rehabilitation Designation Order 2018, published 16th of April 2018. Children Community Residences, Children's Homes Regulations, affirmed in the House and Senate, Children Community Residences Rehabilitation Center regs for foster care, 2018, published and affirmed. Miscellaneous provisions, Supreme Court of Judicature Act.
48.1, I don't know where the Attorney General is going. This is not an appraisal. This is not an appraisal format we're doing here this evening.
I'm answering.
Overruled.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'll proceed.
You proceed.
Right. Miscellaneous provisions, Supreme Court of Judicature Act, Children Bill 2018, where we amended 12 laws, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What did the UNC say in relation to that bill? First of all, let me tell you what that bill was about. That bill, together with the Family and Children Court Division Bill, do you know what we did, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Because I started off by telling you the players in the criminal justice system that this report deals with. We moved the High Court complement of judges from 36 to 64. That is a 77% increase in judicial capacity. We moved the number of masters to case manage by 400%. We created the registrars for the criminal division. What was the UNC's position that Pointe-a-Pierre can't understand? Strangely so. They said no. They would not support it.
48.1, Deputy Speaker. Where is in this report that the Attorney General is mentioning what he's talking about?
Overruled.
Thank you. It's recommendation 58. If my friend would just pull out the report and read it, for heaven's sake. It is in writing at recommendation 58. But this is what you call a lazy approach to opposition. Read the report.
I did.
Address the chair, please.
Mr. Deputy Chair, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what else did we do? In the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, my colleague, the Minister for National Security, then the member for Point Fortin,
He's not speaking.
went out and created in the TTPS by executive support the Child Protection Unit in the TTPS, populated with over 200 plus officers right now. And what do we hear from Naparima? Well, they woulda, coulda, maybe would have looked at domestic violence legislation. So that's the UNC's version of how to protect children coming from the mouth of Naparima and how to protect women. And the PNM's version in the 16 items that I have just enumerated is what we have operationalized already. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let's go further. When we look to the criminal justice system, years in this country hearing about public defender system. What is a public defender system? The country is run by 20 practitioners in the criminal arena. 20 lawyers control the criminal bar. And if your lawyer is not ready, the case can't go on. So what do? The cabinet of this country, under Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, approved the entire structure of the Public Defender's Department. So that if after 3 occasions your lawyer is not ready, your counsel of choice is not ready, you get competent counsel. Your matter continues. So in law, we've already passed. We have done the proclamation for the criminal division. We've improved the judicial complement by 77%. We've added masters. We've added rules of court. We have specialist courts. We went to the defense attorneys. What did we do next? Not what we're doing, what did we do? In the DPP's department, we increased their capacity by over 100%. The Office of the Attorney General, which pays for legal services done at the DPP's office, spent 80% of the fees budget in the AG's office every year on the DPP. What did we do next? We opened the Tobago office for the DPP. What did we do next? The cabinet has approved the new locations for the Port of Spain offices for the DPP. And what did we do next? We have also approved, and is being built out right now, the San Fernando offices for the DPP. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let's go further. What did this government do in terms of managing further criminal justice reform that relates to this report? We said, you need to have evidence. And in treating with evidence, we specifically have created, and we will bring to Parliament very shortly, an evidence bill that treats with the giving of anonymous witness evidence. If you're afraid, if there's reason to believe that you are in jeopardy, you will not need to face a court in person. In that will come the evidence to treat with gang activity in particular. Because one of the reasons that the anti-gang legislation has to be treated with very carefully is in having the physical human evidence introduced. But Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Honourable Member, your initial speaking time has expired. You have an additional 15. You care to avail?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So let's get down now to crime and criminality and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and something that we have in mind, in gear, and have produced. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me tell you what we have done. The government's stated focus to treat with criminality, crime and criminality, is to follow the money. Drug dealers are not in business to not make a profit. They must do something with their profit. Their profit is going to be invested some way, somehow. It may be in cash, it may be in property, it may be in businesses. We don't know. How does one go about finding that information? We have brought to this Parliament a suite of legislation, the Income Tax Amendment Act, and I'll say no more because it's before the House right now. We brought forward the FATCA legislation. We brought forward several pieces of law to meet our FATF obligations. We brought forward amendments to the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Financial Intelligence Unit Act. We increased the manpower in the Financial Intelligence Unit by hundreds of percentage points. That resulted in the reporting of financial crimes moving, if you aggregated the years 2011 to 2015, it's $4.5 billion of suspicious transactions. And in 1 year, because we improved the complement in the FIU, it jumped to $22.1 billion. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, what we did very importantly is we went to work on the golden pot that is the land registry. And I said that I would have come back to that point. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the land registry, there are 3 registries. Civil registry, which is births, deaths, marriages, etc. You have the land registry, which is all the records of land transactions in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, you have the companies registry. There are 11 million land volumes. There are 400,000 company records. And there are 4 million records to treat with births, deaths, marriages, etc. We took that entire registry. We inherited software which was out of date, no servers, no operational function. We built up 2 of the registries already. We took the entire registry and physically relocated it to the Richmond Street Plaza after retrofitting the vault to make sure it could work right and to avoid the terrible design that was in place before. But we digitized the land records. We have done millions of land records. And why have we done millions of land records, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Because you will find the criminality in land records. You will find fake companies. You will find beneficial ownership that has not been declared in the land records in this country, as the suspicious transactions in the FIU demonstrate happened last year with $22.1 billion of suspicious transactions. I'm not telling you what we are going to do, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm telling you what the government has done already. Now let me plug in to what we are going to do in the coordinated position. Laid on the table of this Parliament, as a matter of fact, something I left out in the criminal justice system. Today, you will see the Administration of Justice Indictable Proceedings Amendment Bill 2018. We intend to move the Parliament with immediacy to abolish preliminary inquiries. Let me give you an example without going into anticipation. That solves the backlog of 20 years of work. Let's go back to follow the money and crime. Obviously, the amendments that we have in consideration for the Global Forum, for FATCA, for FATF, apply to the follow the money transactions. We have completed and will bring to Parliament after Cabinet has had its final view, the Civil Asset Explain Your Wealth Bill. Civil asset forfeiture explain your wealth legislation on a civil standard in a civil court where there are no delays of the type in the criminal justice system. We have completed and will bring to Parliament the removal of beneficial ownership. What does that mean? Who is the real owner of the company? Who owns the share? We have completed and will bring to Parliament the abolition of secret trusts or trusts in general, so that the real owner of land must be discovered. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me put this for the people of Trinidad and Tobago into context. If you can't find a gun, if you can't find the drugs, if you can't find the corruption in flagrante, where you catch the man red-handed or the woman red-handed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it helps to be able to ask them, where you get that? Explain the BMW, explain the mansion, explain the multiple homes, explain the gold that you're bringing on your neck. And if you can't explain that in a court of law, you lose it. So what do? We created the connection to the income tax procedures. That's no secret. That's a stated intention. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let's go further. In that matrix, Trinidad and Tobago has the opportunity to change its culture. So what did the TTPS say? And I took note of it, and I commend the TTPS for this. Commissioner Griffith is reported in the papers yesterday as announcing what I think is a radical improvement in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. The creation of a financial investigation division, which takes the amalgamation of Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau, the Financial Investigation Branch, the Fraud Squad, and the Cybercrime Unit. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that in the domain of the TTPS acting in its constitutional independence, with the safeguard of the Director of Public Prosecutions in Section 90 for the DPP and 123A for the Commissioner of Police. In the court of law, from Section 99 of the Constitution go forward, where the court stands separate. That is nuclear to the fight against crime, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And if you start adding the pieces of the puzzle together, what I have just described as having been completed and what is about to come to finally complete it, this has never been done before in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, where a government in 3 years could have created backlog jam destruction, where we dynamite the backlog by creating divisions, by moving offenses, by digitizing data, be it in licensing authority, motor vehicles, because I haven't told you about all of the things we already passed in the motor vehicle realm. And you know them, red light enforcement, spot speed camera, etc. Add that now to the anti-corruption package in a criminal justice system that finally has rules of court, that has masters, that has a criminal division, that has specialist courts, improved DPP, public defenders, witness anonymity. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that has never been done before in the history of this country. And what I have just described to you and to the nation listening on is a connecting of the pieces of the puzzle. And if this country wants to note the difference between the plan from Naparima, which is, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to amend, maybe the domestic violence legislation for women, compare that with what we did for children and women. Compare what was not done by the 4 ministers of justice, 7 ministers of national security, 2 attorneys general, 1 prime minister, and a cabinet of 35 people opposite in the criminal justice arena. No rules of court, no new masters, no specialist structures, no improvement. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, all of that, nothing, costs the country billions of dollars. $400 billion were spent by my colleagues opposite. And I noticed that they have a penchant for standing up in this parliament when in opposition and naming people who died by name. How come Couva South wasn't naming people who died by name when he was a minister in the government of Siparia, of the UNC? My dear friend Couva North, who fights for her constituents, as I recognize, I hear her call people by name. I hear my friend from Princestown calling people by name. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, whether we were in opposition or now in government, you don't hear us coming to drag people's name in the mud in Parliament here. Not in opposition, not in government. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, our record on the Parliament floor in opposition is that we supported 96% of the law that my learned friends brought opposite. Even when independent senators said no, as they did in the Children's Act, it was the 6 opposition senators that supported that law. We didn't ask for it to go to Joint Select Committee. It was over 200 clauses long. We sat down and we dealt with it on the floor of the Parliament. I myself moved 202 amendments to that bill that night. We didn't gallery about Joint Select Committee. We didn't go to a Joint Select Committee, have a unanimous report, and then come to the floor of the Parliament and change our minds, as we did with the income tax, or the anti-terrorism, or the anti-gang, or any one of them. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I forgot something. We abolished child marriage. We did that by removing our 3/5 clause. My friends opposite fought it to the bitter end, said I was a strategic attorney general. They bring in outside speakers, a member from the Muslim faith, a member from the Hindu faith, into the Senate. I was there. And what did they say? Don't touch the law, leave it just so. We said 18 stone cold. And we passed the law. And Trinidad and Tobago, as a leading country in this region, has come in for open commendation. But did this government have the support of my friends opposite? No, sir, we did not. So, I've now reported to the House and to the nation and to the people listening to this debate and the outside world, not what we intend to do, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but what we have done, what is being done, and what is about to come. And dare I say that this is nuclear. It has the potential to right the wrongs in our country. And if my learned friends opposite would just put down the politics and agree to good law, we could fight each other on the political platforms. But this Parliament ought to be a place for unanimity of purpose when it comes to bona fide material. And I can only urge my colleagues to remember that the population is quite discerning. They will eventually see, by the fruit of what has been produced, what can be our future, and they will remember us to a man for our positions taken against. I thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I recognize the member for Urupuch East.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to intervene in this matter before us. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think with the exception of Laventil West, who moved the motion, I am the next person to speak who have actually been on the Joint Select Committee. And therefore, I would like to bring to bear in my presentation some of the issues that arose at the Joint Select Committee, which has been a Joint Select Committee charged with the responsibility for taking this matter further, the report of the Deusaran Committee, and bringing this matter to the Parliament today. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, just for the record, let me say that our colleagues, the member for St. Augustine and Senator Saddam Hussein, served before on this Joint Select Committee addressing this matter. And thereafter, Senator Jared Ramdeen and myself were appointed to the Joint Select Committee on National Security that continued really the discussion and the work so that both the member for St. Augustine and Senator Hussein also participated. And in some way, I think they participated in a more full manner than myself and Senator Ramdeen, because when we joined this committee, the work was already advanced in some way. So I want to just give credit to them for their contribution as well. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Attorney General who spoke before me, I think had a wonderful opportunity today to finally deliver his budget presentation, which for one reason or another, he was denied of an opportunity a few weeks ago. So we got it, and it was long in coming. And we saw what the Attorney General reflected on as his achievements. Mr. Deputy Speaker, where I'm going with my presentation to tell you in the beginning is that I intend to work my way in the report to establish some of the issues and some of the bothering problems that myself and Senator Ramdeen in particular would have had with the report. While we are in agreement with the thematics and we are in agreement with some elements of the content, we believe that there is some value in this report and in this thinking. We did have some difficulty, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the structure of the report. The structure, and I think Caroni Central touched on that issue, the structure of the report, some of the recommendations, and we would have liked to go further to flesh out a bit more some of those issues. Clearly, we are in disagreement, as the government and opposition today admitted. We are in disagreement with some of the recommendations of the Deusaran Committee as it relates to the change that we would all like to see. In the beginning, let me say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the problems in the police service did not start yesterday, and they will not end tomorrow. This report is not a magic formula to transform the police service. As far as I can see, in no time in the short future ahead, in the short term, this report will not transform the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in the short term. This is not a magic formula, as Professor Deusaran himself admitted. So what we are trying to do is to discuss policy and long-term approach. The government must also admit today that whatever is decided upon to go forward today, it is not only this government, but a future government that will have to provide continuity. So that if the work has to continue, it is not this administration. It would be the next administration and maybe another administration after that will have to continue that work. Because this is deep policy work to be done involving fundamental legislative change. Because the belief is that you will not get the cultural change unless you make the institutional change. And the institution today, as all of us admitted in one way or another, we have a crisis with institutional credibility and institutional integrity. And we can explain that in every which way we want, how bad things are. In fact, a thematic emerging today is really every speaker told us how bad things are with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, how terrible it is. So there's no need for me to repeat that. I think people know that. I mean, I just want to summarize by saying that police officers do not trust police officers. If you poll, and they did poll, and you ask a policeman, would you consent that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service will investigate you? He said no. Let somebody else do it, not the TTPS. So the police service does not trust the police service. And that is how bad it is. But this didn't become bad yesterday, or last year, or might I say in the 5 years of the partnership. It was former and deceased Minister of National Security, Martin Joseph, who alluded to this many years ago, I think over 10, 15 years ago, when in a meeting, a bipartisan meeting in St. Joseph between the Basdeo Pandey, then opposition, and the Patrick Manning government, it was said at that time, by 2005, 2006 somewhere, it was said that the police service had more or less collapsed as a functioning institution. And I'm talking about over a decade ago. What we have done over the years is try to work with a creature that is certainly not perfect and maybe not even well. We have tried to work with that creature and to deliver results. The other point is that while we appreciate the Attorney General's confidence and clearly he believes that he has done some good work, and I'm sure in time we will see the results of that work, the rules and regulations and the new structures and so on. In time we will see. But we also have a crisis that the member for Couva South alluded to, that the member for Naparima alluded to. We have the crisis of today. We have the crisis of today to face. And that is a crisis that we face on an hourly basis. The Attorney General, I think without intending to, invited us to depersonalize the debate, because the Attorney General, and I think St. Joseph, had a difficulty with the opposition members now calling the names of victims and so on. And while I understand that perspective, there's a counter perspective. If you stop calling the names of victims, you will forget who are the victims. You will see organization as the victim. You will see institution as the victim, and you will not see flesh and blood as the victim. So there's a real danger when you forget the names of victims. And today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I had this ghastly view today on my phone when someone, well-intentioned, sent me a picture of the Danielle Yearwood and what appeared to be the unborn baby in a funeral. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I saw that. And my stomach churned. And I felt a heaviness inside me. But Mr. Speaker, if we forget her name, we'll forget the human side to what we are doing. So I encourage the Attorney General in all the work he will be doing and all the good work that he is announcing, never forget the names. Never forget the human being. Never forget the flesh and blood. Because they are really why you are doing what you are doing. Don't forget them. And we call their names, well, they're dead, they can't complain, but we call their names, but we want to remember them. We want to remember that situation. We want to remember the victims in my constituency in Couva South and in San Fernando West. We want to, just a couple weeks ago, I was speaking to relatives of a victim in San Fernando West, and they were explaining what happened in a crime scene and so on. The day we forget victims is the day we forget what is our purpose in the parliament. And I say no more on that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Attorney General, of course, reminded us that the UNC had 6 or even 7 ministers in the Ministry of National Security, but failed to tell us in 3 years they have had about 4 or 5. And that is not a problem. I could understand that, because your term is not yet finished. So it may be more, but you are on the rack counting, and I think you have had 3 or 4. One is almost, one I think even government members forget who it is. So the point there is that we need to, one day forget who is that. But Madam, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the report deals with restructuring the police service. And I can tell you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't want to waste time going through and quoting from, verse and so on. But I took a read of it, and of course we were part of doing it. And I want to say the human resource strategies and the human resource techniques dealt with here are good. They deal with discipline, we deal with promotions, we deal with entry points, we deal with recruitment, we deal with creating a fresh, professional cadre of people. And those are fine. What we would have liked to see, quite frankly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and we had asked for it in the minutes will reflect, if we could have separated in some way what the police management audit report, the Deusan report recommended, and what the JSC recommended. If you could have separated it, because now there's it is a little cumbersome. What did the Deusan report say and what did you say? Because clearly, as the government admitted, you are here today to support a report. But there's a recommendation of the Deusan committee report, which you said, listen, we don't want no part of that, That is an elected commissioner of police. You have said you are no part of that. So clearly you are not here to support the Deusan committee report in its entirety. You are here to support a report of the Joint Select Committee on the Deusaran Committee. And the recommendations must be separated, clearly, because we don't support that. In fact, the Ramesh Deusaran Committee and Professor Deusaran said that they were not in support even of a civilian becoming commissioner of police or a non-police officer. So said, so done. So we had to work that out and flesh it out, and I'm happy today that at least those matters are coming up. The other difficulty we had, and the Attorney General, I will come to it, because I want to comment so much on earlier things before I get to it. This morning, of course, we heard from the mover of the motion, who was surprisingly non-adversarial, and surprisingly so. But the member for Portisway North, St. Anne's West, did something this morning which I want to put on record and I'm concerned with. You see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the police service as we know it today, and maybe that's why I regret that I'm speaking after the Attorney General, because I would have liked the Attorney General to speak after me, because he may have been able to guide me, actually, on a matter. You see, the police service is a special creature in the system of government today, by virtue of the Constitutional Amendment 2006. You see, the police service today, by Section 123A in particular, the Constitution spells out an independent role for the Commissioner of Police. Correct. It spells that out. So that when you are in government, the Minister of Education, Minister of Sports, Minister of whatever, nothing is wrong if they are presenting in Parliament and the Permanent Secretary and all the directors of the ministry are here to hear their ministers and so on. That's fine. But I would have a difficulty, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with the Commissioner of Police and the police service themselves. I took note that I did not think it was something completely proper to have the hierarchy of the police service corralled into the Parliament to listen to the Minister of National Security. Because before I spoke, I wanted to put through a call to the Commissioner and ask him if he can come here to hear me. And if he could have brought the other 10 leaders of the police service, because they may be interested in what I say. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will take the Hansard and send it to him in an envelope and invite him to read my comments, which I thought the Minister of National Security should have done. Because it is a special, or he could have gone to the YouTube and looked at it, but I don't think the Commissioner would have time. So I would have highlighted certain points and sent to him. But the difficulty I have is that the police service and the Commissioner has an independent role away from the executive. And apart from that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am not talking about wasteful employment of police time. I think the member for Aruka Maloney would know about that. But I am talking about the separation between those institutions.
Members,
it is not a ministry. The Permanent Secretary in Health could come here, the divisional leaders, the chairman of boards and so on, to hear the Minister of Health. But I'm not sure it operates that way with the police service. And they are mandated to come to Finance Committee, and the Minister of Health reminds me that at the Finance Committee, all the divisions, including the judiciary, including the President, including the Parliament, they will come with the Minister of Finance to explain themselves by way of their expenditure and what they are asking for and so on. So it's a completely different ballgame. I'm very conscious of that. And I'm conscious of that because of the Constitution. You see at 123A, which was not there before, it was the amendment, it says subject to 123(1), which deals with the Police Service Commission, incidentally, the Commissioner of Police shall have the complete power to manage the police service and is required to ensure that the human, financial, and material resources available to the service are used in an efficient and effective manner. I am concerned with that word, complete power to manage. And why I'm concerned is that what happens in government is that the Parliament makes law. We make law. What is before us today is not a bill. What is before us today is not a bill. It is a policy document. It may be a very serious policy document, but it is not a bill. When you make a law, you give that to the Commissioner of Police and you say, Mr. Commissioner, this is the law of the land. Please implement. He has to abide by law. Today we are discussing policy. Now there is a policy track as well. The Cabinet can determine policy. and the cabinet can easily go to another committee of the cabinet called the National Security Council, which include cabinet members. And in their weekly meeting with the heads of the protective sector and so on, they can say this is the policy as approved by the cabinet, and we would ask you to consider and implement within the law. But not the parliament. The parliament, and with the parliament, I think there is a risk that we are discussing and debating policy for which we are not even approving yet. We haven't voted on this matter. And the Minister of National Security told us that this matter we're debating today, hold on, we already sent the report to the commissioner. Look, he already decide how we're implementing this. So why are we here today? Why are we here if the report was already sent to the Commissioner of Police? The Commissioner has already made a matrix of what he's doing, and they are implementing according to the report. What are we here for? Suppose the government decide today that they're not supporting it. Suppose the parliament don't vote on this. The commissioner already has the report. He has a matrix and he's busy implementing and maybe doing a good job. But he came today, the Minister of National Security, waved paper. He said, look, the commissioner already gone ahead and implementing. But what are we debating here then? And again, I want to say this in the context that nothing is wrong if a policy document is shared with the commissioner and the commissioner has to implement policy. You can do that. I mean, I'll go for and say, yes, you can do that. It's the will of the parliament and so on. But I was taken aback. That document has already been sent, matrix worked out, implementation plan on song, and you come to the parliament and say, listen, notwithstanding Mr. Griffith implementing everything, let me debate it first. What's that? I mean, in a local thing, what's that? So, having said that, let me move forward because I mean, and of course, the minister from Portersville, North St. Anne's West will lose no opportunity to frighten everybody about white-collar crime and who is arrested and who is not. And I like this style. They say, extend your hand, and when we extend our hand, they point fingers at us. So that is a style. I don't think the national community buys that anymore. So they could continue doing that because I want to alert them. I think it helps us, politically and otherwise. It helps us. The member for St. Joseph, of course, the member, I was really concerned with this member. The members spoke about the Police Service Commission having no soul. And who had no soul? The service. The police service didn't have a soul. The report said that. And I was very concerned with that, and he dropped his voice in a way and dealt with that. So I don't know how to respond to that. I just will move. I have no response to that one. And I Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I could tell you I have no response to something. The Attorney General, of course, spoke. And the Attorney General is not having a good week, I think. Regrettably, the Attorney General got into a tiff with a Senator Hussain. And pursuant, of course, to this matter, because we are dealing with legislation, and the Attorney General himself spoke about it. The Senator Hussain was simply saying, given what was before us, the matter dealt with any offense under written law, and any offense under written law means any offense under written law, not just the proceeds of crime or the anti-terrorism. And there's a dispute, and regrettably the Attorney General, as titular head of the bar, and maybe a candidate for senior counsel, said that they should take back the law degree of the senator and so on. I mean, but you see,
members, please.
But this is the operation of the government, Mr. Speaker. Take back law degree, take back house, take back money, take back everything. And eventually the people will take back the government. So I am not asking San Fernando West to apologize to the senator, but as a more dignified person, he would know what he has to do. But that was not the beginning of, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that was not the beginning of his troubles. You see, today was a significant day as well. Today, in the High Court of Trinidad and Tobago, a matter involving police, I drop it, Mr. Speaker, a matter involving the police, a woman police constable, like Aruka Maloney, a woman police constable, Sharon Roop, won a matter against the Attorney General, in which the Sharon Roop versus the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago won the matter in which the High Court, this is a matter involving police officers, so I am dead on target here. And the 2017, the claim number. And in the conclusion of the judgment, I don't want to, the claimant's right, the court ruled in a High Court ruling today, the claimant's right under Section 4H of the Constitution has been breached since the aim of the TTPS in not permitting her to wear the hijab is disproportionate to its aims of maintaining a neutral religious environment. So that a police constable has gone to court, and in a landmark judgment, the court ruled that the female member of the Islamic faith ought to wear her hijab while in conduct of her duties as a police officer in Trinidad and Tobago. And the attorney, no, I will not. I will not suggest that the Attorney General degree should be withdrawn. But the instant proceedings, and in the matter, of course, I mean, the judgment is a long judgment, of 70 pages or so. Goes through a lot of the law. But the lady police, the woman police, took the Commissioner of Police and the Attorney General to court on that matter of her constitutional rights. And the role of the opposition is to protect the constitutional rights of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Before the Attorney General interrupt me, which I will give way, I just want to needle him one more, because I want to tell him that I know the matter that will infuriate him the most is that the claimant was represented by Mr. Anand Ramlogan, Senior Counsel, and Mr. Gerard Ramdeen, and others.
Adri, before you speak, take your correct seating, please.
Okay, I will continue to allow him to move. Mr. Deputy Speaker, so this is not his best week, and he will, yeah.
Thank you kindly for giving me. I'd just like to put onto the record that I too took a case to court on behalf of hijab wearing and burqa wearing and succeeded. That claim which was brought was against the Commissioner of Police. The Attorney General was a related party. I, in fact, support the decision made. It was a decision made by another functionary. So it's very important to put onto the record that I myself have represented the burqa and hijab issue and been successful in court. And in fact, the case that they relied on was my case. So I don't share the same, view that my friend does. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, it was in anticipation of that I allowed him to intervene, because I knew that he would agree with the judgment. Notwithstanding, the Attorney General is named as the defendant. All matters are taken against the Attorney General in our system, so that the Attorney General himself, not the member for San Fernando West, but the Attorney General ends up on the losing side of it. But the office, but having said that, the Attorney General is on record with his position on this matter. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the issue arose today as well, and I want to touch on it, that the matter of crime and criminality and the role of the police service. Now, I know members opposite like to make light of when members on this side speak about Singapore and so on, and they make light of it because they feel we are overquoted that area. But unless I'm mistaken, Singapore is one of the few places on the planet where their leadership fired an entire police service at some time. And they have a different political structure and different political evolution that allows some of those things to happen. But we are not today suggesting that we do the same thing that we did to Petrotrin, to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, because the police service here is represented in a worse position than Petrotrin. Correct. So we are not suggesting that, but we are reminding the government that in dealing with the police service, one has to be very cautious because of the constitutional independence of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Commissioner of Police. And today, I thought that there was a border that was crossed today when I heard that the police commissioner was already, and the police commissioner is known for many things, and what he's known for is that he's a very enthusiastic person. And he's zealous, and he's like that. And if you ask him to do something, I don't think he would waste much time. He's known for that. In fact, if there were commissioners over the years who would take long to respond and so on, this commissioner may be blamed for responding too quickly. So I was not surprised to know that he already has his matrix and moving. I was surprised to know that without Parliament approving this matter, that it was already sent to an independent office to proceed. The minister from Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West, I'm praying that before the next general election, he will wake up and realize that he's the Minister of National Security. Because there are statements being made, there are threats being issued all the time, there are points of arrogance which are really unbecoming of a Minister of National Security, particularly. And yes, and he will understand that. Now to the Attorney General, and I want to focus on this matter of white-collar crime. And I was mentioning to my colleagues earlier that I even have a problem with calling something white-collar crime because it connotes a colonial dichotomy of deep psychological resentment. When you call something white-collar crime, you are suggesting, well, it is complex, it deals with intelligence, it deals with rich people and big money, so it's white. And anything else beyond that street is something else. I suggest, I always say economic crimes because they deal with much business of economy and economic crimes against people and so on. But I want to encourage the Attorney General because I want to tell him that I have really been a convert to his campaign on follow the money. And you can now testify that I'm now helping you to follow the money. And more than following the money, we on this side are concerned with finding that money. And we are concerned with finding the money, and in presentations before I alluded to where money can be found. It created a problem. I think I was thrown before the Privilege Committee and the court, but I will continue to help the Attorney General on that matter. And the Attorney General, in discussing the Ministry of Legal Affairs essentially, and the tracing following the money, spoke of the companies division, the land, and one more before, civil, right? And civil is the registration, births, and so on. But the Attorney General will also, in his matrix, as he follows the money and finds the money, I want to point you in a direction of customs. Customs, which falls under the Ministry of Finance, I think it does. You will find, if you follow the money and you focus on customs, you may well find that you will have the importation of items. For example, vehicles and luxury vehicles coming in for a particular person, but that person may not be using it. That person may not have it in their possession, and somebody else may be the beneficial user or in occupation of an item, whether it's a vehicle or otherwise. And if you follow the money, where monies are paid to contractors or monies are paid to people, and you see they're importing over a period of time vehicles, 4 vehicles, 5 vehicles. They're important, well, I don't want to call the vehicle. I could call the vehicle number, but listen, I can't take a hat trick before the Privilege Committee now. I mean, I just can't take that hat trick. But if you see that they are important vehicles, and the vehicles are not on their compound, it is not being used clearly by the people who are important, but it's being used by others. It is being used by children of others. It is being used in a way, then you can easily say, look, these vehicles for the net value of $3 million, $10 million was imported by someone. It is not in their possession. It is on loan to somebody else. And you can follow the money so that you're concerned with land, which I understand very well, and I support that you must look at land acquisition as well, then you follow the money trail. You must follow also vehicles and other items that come through customs, because the customs will keep records. So when someone, for example, takes money, a contractor or so, they send it to America and say, this is to buy equipment. But when you look at customs and you find that there's no equipment coming back into the country, you can follow the money to know that that money has not been used for the purpose for which it was obtained from the banking system in Trinidad and Tobago, goes elsewhere. But there's no equipment. There's no customs declaration. And if there's a declaration, it's not for the quantum. So 3 million United States dollars leave to go, but equipment worth 500,000 United States dollars come back. And I give you a good clue as to where you can put that, you know, that Sherlock Holmes hat on, get your magnifying glass, and go in that direction. It will help you along with, I'm not saying abandon the land focus or the company focus. I'm saying that in customs, yeah, in customs, you can see some of these matters that I think will help you in your, in your journey looking to find money, looking at customs will help you. And listen, I don't want to go there. And the Attorney General, of course, spoke today about the creation of new institutions. And institutional change is very critical to fighting white-collar crime. And you know what I like about this debate on white-collar crime? I welcome these debates on white-collar crime. Don't say that. My time up?
Your initial 30 minutes has expired. You have an additional 15. You care to avail?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Naparima, please. Proceed.
Thank you very much. I want to alert the government and the Attorney General and Portesway North in particular. There are many countries in the world that create this veneer of fighting corruption. And they're always fighting corruption and fighting white-collar crime and so on. And you know what they do? They invent institutions, populate it with persons who are supportive of the government. And they go after political targets. I will not call the name of countries because I don't want to bring countries into the debate. But you follow certain countries of the world. Every time government change, one cabinet go to jail. And the next cabinet come in, and when the next government change, the current cabinet go to jail. They are doing that in the world, and it is undermining as well the quest to deal with real serious white-collar crime. So a prime minister will be in jail one day, and the current incumbent, as soon as he leaves office, he moves from the prime minister office to the state jail. And it will work the other way around. It will work the other way around. And that is happening in a lot of the banana republics of the world that just set up ad hoc, politically motivated institutions on the guise of dealing with corruption and dealing with white-collar crime. And they end up having this type of tag team going in and out of the state jail, and all the parties and all the prime minister. You're looking for a prime minister today, he in jail. Then you look for him again, he become the prime minister, and the fellow who was there, he gone in. And that is not healthy for countries. That undermines the very democratic fiber of countries. So be careful of this thing. And I want to remind the Attorney General, I always hear this boast coming from opposite, that when they were in opposition, they gave 90% support. I think today you said 96% support. Well, by next week it might be 97% support. I want to say, unless I am mistaken, and I stand corrected, so far, you're in your fourth year. Has this opposition failed to support any matter that required a constitutional majority to fight crime? We eventually supported it. So I want to stand proudly to say the Kamla Prasad Bisesa opposition has supported 100% of the legislation to fight crime. So we beat you there too. Is 100% of the legislation to fight crime. We have supported this government. And
handles himself, please. Naparima Princess Town. Proceed.
Thank you for your confidence, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And so the matter before us now, which I'm not talking about the contents of the matter, yes, we're in a committee stage, but that doesn't mean that you will not get this support or you will not receive our support for that, if it is good legislation. But remember, we have passed 100% of your legislation to deal with crime. Yes, we delayed because we wanted better legislation.
You have to listen to us.
Yes, you listen to us eventually, but in dealing with you, you will always do the right thing with us, but you will go kicking and screaming. So we will carry you the journey, and we will help as the time comes. But you cannot stand and say this opposition has been an obstruction to fighting crime. You cannot say that. That you cannot say. I don't want to get into the anti-gang legislation. What has happened, I think Couva South and Naparima dealt with that. But the opposition stands ready and willing to support you. Even with this matter today, as we have some difficulties here, and I just want to reflect on two matters again before my time is up. We have some difficulty here because in the roots, I just want to reflect on that quickly. As you say, as they said in the report, I had a difficulty, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with proposing reports in which different routes are proposed and so on. I thought that we should have agreed on something as a committee and come to the Parliament and say, listen, this is what we agree with. Not leave it to the Parliament to go and explore what we are doing. The purpose of a Joint Select Committee is to have a report that says the Joint Select Committee agree with that, or a minority report to say the minority disagree. Interestingly, we don't have a minority report here, and I just want to explain that. We don't have a minority report here for one profound reason. We had a difficulty with the entire structure of the report. So it was not a case of identifying item 4, item 25, item 36, and saying we disagree. It was a case where we had a problem with the entire structure. And to do a minority report is almost as if we have to do over a whole report. You know, because we believe that we should have gone there, look at the Deusan committee report and say, put that aside. We are now pulling 5 or 6 key issues from that, debating it, agreeing to it, and coming back to the House. We did not believe we should have jumbled the two and come to the House with a sort of mixture, a cocktail of the Deusan report and the Joint Select Committee thinking. Because if I ask members opposite, or even on this side, I say, what really are the recommendations of the Joint Select Committee that is specific to the committee, not the Deusan report? I don't think members can find that easily. But there are issues there that members of the Joint Committee, if you read the minutes, members of the Joint Select Committee said, no, 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 we want to do something separate. We want to state something separate. I think with the SRPs, that was one issue that we spent some time on discussing the SRPs, discussing qualifications of police officers. We were very clear, Mr. Deputy Speaker. How much time I have left? How much time?
3 minutes.
How much minutes? 3? We were very clear, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we had to do more work. Okay. We were very clear, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the matter of the SRPs pose a problem. Whereas this was a sort of post-colonial appendage to the police service, and it worked in a certain way early in our history, we were not sure that that system of SRPs was working today, that we should have looked at another way of expanding the police service. That was one. Secondly, in terms of qualifications, as the member for Caroni Central, I think he put it better than me, better than I could. Having necessarily persons to say, we take 5 subjects, we take 6 subjects, we take 8 subjects, I am not sure that that by itself will bring the fundamental change that you need because of the culture, So that some of us were not key on that. A major point, and I think Senator Ramdeen was a main campaigner for that, and I want to put on the record, Senator Ramdeen was a driving force behind a line of argument. Senator Ramdeen and myself agreed, but he advocated strongly that there were issues now that we need to deal with that is not in the report. They are not in the report. But if dealt with, they can make an immediate impact on dealing with crime. With all the Attorney General told us today, and some of us, I was surprised when he was calling out all these things, we still have 450 murders and counting. Now, whatever we are doing, it may be good, but it is not impacting. Huh?
A dozen plus a week.
A dozen plus a week. And the member for Portus Bay North, St. Anne's West, I want to tell you that your headache is now beginning. So if you are feeling frustrated or tired, it is now beginning. That job you have there, whatever, that job is a job that will give you enormous pressure. Because as the hours go by and the murder rate pile up, the country looks to our government generally to bring some type of order in the short term. These recommendations, let me give you the sequencing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and this is an important point to make as I conclude. We have before us a committee report and a committee report. Yes, the police service is already working, we are told today. Mr. Speaker, these changes require legislative change. The government, if you look at the week, the working week is Monday to Friday, and you call that a term of office, the government is on Thursday. They have 1 day left. They're in their 4th year. They are 12 months away from one election and 20 months or so away from another election. We have Christmas coming up, then you have Carnival, then you have the holiday period coming up, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So the government has very little time in office, assuming that they will complete their term of office. When they go, they have to make legislation to give impact, to effect most of these things. Legislation will come next year. When that comes next year, given the fact that the legislation may be a profound piece, comprehensive, and so on, that may go to a Joint Select Committee. That means by the end of next year, you could be in Parliament debating something. That don't mean you'll pass it. It could be in 2020 that we pass legislation. you then have to implement legislation, and as we all know, from the electronic monitoring device in particular, and others, DNA, electronic monitoring, call again, these big ones, it takes time, in some cases, years to implement. I say with great respect to the government and with the enthusiasm of the Commissioner of Police that many of these recommendations will not be implemented before 2020. They will not be. Many will not be. So that today we must not give the population, by the same token, a false sense of hope by what we are doing today. The immediate issues today, as Senator Ramdeen said in the report, the witness protection program is a critical program. The manpower requirements, the requirements for vehicle. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I just want to give a personal account. In office some years ago, because I live, and I've always lived San Fernando, even when in office, I would be coming down on the highway from Port of Spain late hours of the night, leaving in the morning, but generally late hours coming down. And I remember, Mr. Speaker, several times I would call, not the commissioner, because I am no friend of a commissioner, and I know the line between politician and police. I would call the Minister of National Security, whoever he is, because that is my cabinet colleague. And I would say, listen, I just left Port of Spain at 11 o'clock. I've reached home in San Fernando, and I saw not one police vehicle on the road. And I said, listen, that's your business. Security is your business. You have to deal with that. And one day I met the Commissioner of Police then, and he met me in a function, and he said, how much police car you see on the road last night? So the message got through. And as time go along, you would see more, and you would see more, and you would get that. But patrolling, you know, we underestimate the basic because our mind always look to the complex and the comprehensive, but we underestimate the basic. The patrols, the stop and search, the joint army patrol and police patrol operations. Christmas is upon us, Mr. Minister, and the minister has fundamental responsibility. I'm calling on this minister not to subcontract out security to the Commissioner of Police. Not to see the Commissioner of Police as the superhero who is on the charge dealing with crime, and if he does something good, you push yourself, you elbow next to him in a press conference, and if something bad go, you take off and leave him alone standing and tell him go and hold a press conference and explain that. You cannot subcontract out the political responsibility for dealing with national security. So if the people complain, the people vote for a government. Whether they regret it or not, they vote for a government. And the people must complain to the government. They assume authority, executive authority, for public policy and for change, not the Commissioner of Police. So this is what we are seeing developing here. And I agree with I think San Fernando West, I agree with him, that with the advent of a new Commissioner of Police, there will be hope. There will be hope that something will change. And this commissioner, because he has this capacity to be present and omnipresent almost, he brings that level of hope. He brings that level because people see and people hear quickly. And he has a rapid response character. But that is not the be-all and the end-all. The Commissioner of Police by himself will not make the change we need. It is the political directorate, through policy that we are discussing here today, through resources, that can make that change. And I'm very conscious of this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that at the end of the day, the government must account to the people on the crime, not the Commissioner of Police. The government must account, the Commissioner of Police, incidentally, must account to the Police Service Commission. They have a process to deal with that. But the government accounts for crime and insecurity. And no one in this house, on both sides of the house, can stand today and say that citizens feel safe and feel secure. No one can do that. And Mr. Attorney General, again, I want to remind you that when people go to court, look, your Prime Minister going to court. The Prime Minister take me to court, but that is his right. Yes. If he believes that his rights are being violated, the Prime Minister of this country has a right to take me to court, which he did. So you cannot say that the opposition took the Commissioner of Police order to court and they were wrong. They went to court for the same reason. They believed that rights were being violated. And the court ruled that they were and amended the order. So the opposition UNC did not intend to delay you. We intend to go to court
so that this country could continue to be a country upheld by the rule of law. What is the government asking us to do? If we believe that they break the law, turn a blind eye, give them a blind and say, well, your cause is good, you have good intention, you could break the law. It doesn't work like that. If we believe the law has been violated, we have a right to go to court, as they go back in West going to court. Not now, we went to court many years, he's been in the courthouse. So do not blame the opposition for that. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we stand with these few comments on the matter. Thank you.
Leader of the House.
Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the House do now adjourn. Y'all thought I was going to speak.
No. We are disappointed.
You know, to Wednesday, the 14th day of November 2018 at 1:30 p.m., at which time we will do the miscellaneous provisions, Heritage Petroleum Pariah Fuel Trading and Guaracara Refining Vesting Bill 2018. Thank you very much.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. In accordance with Standing Orders 11 and 12.1, this House now stands adjourned to Wednesday, the 14th November, 2018 at 1:30 p.m.